Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming down today. Please remember when you use your microphones, you must press the button to switch off your microphone after you have spoken, as the system only allows one microphone to be used at any one time. The red light means that your microphone is to be used at any one time. The red light that means that your microphone is on and camera will automatically pan towards you. Please also note that the microphones should not be moved. Please speak directly to the top of the microphone and try to avoid turning your head away when speaking. Please can all members and officers introduce themselves each time they speak. Obviously, I'm Councillor Andy Canning. I'm the Councillor for Dorchester West and Chair of this meeting. On then to the main part of the agenda. Firstly, apologies.
We have received apologies from Councillor Roland Tarr, and Councillor David Northam is going to leave just before the end of the meeting.
Thank you. Any others? No, thank you. Good. The minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of February 2026. Are you happy for me to sign them as a true and accurate record of the meeting? Yes, everybody. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest in particular relevant to item 9 to do with being a landlord? So does anyone need to make a declaration right now? No? Okay. Questions from councillors? We have no questions from councillors. Then on to item 6. Item 4, we don't have any public participation either, so there's nothing for 4 or 5. Item 6, civil enforcement. Laura to do the main part of the presentation, but we'll do Councillor Andrews, who's the portfolio holder.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillor John Andrews, Sherborne East, and Cabinet Member for Police Services. Introducing this paper, this provides an overview of Dorset Council's proposed approach to adopting civil enforcement of moving traffic contraventions under Part 6 of the Traffic Management Act 2004, which enables local authorities to enforce restrictions such as banned turns, yellow box junctions, no entry signs, one-way systems, and of course school streets, through civil rather than police-led enforcement. The government has progressively expanded these powers to councils outside of London, offering authorities the opportunity to apply for designation order to undertake enforcement using approved camera systems where needed to improve road safety, reduce congestion and support active travel. Dorset Council's consideration of these powers aligns with the national policy encouraging proportionate, transparent and targeted enforcement at locations where non-compliant affects network efficiency or safety. This report sets out the legislative context, expected benefits and operational steps relating to potential implementation. And I'm going to hand over to Laura now, who is the author of the paper.
Thank you, John. Good morning, committee. As John said, I'm Laura Russ in the Transport Planning team, and I'm here to present a report on the civil enforcement of moving traffic contraventions, known more briefly as Moving Traffic Enforcement, MTE. The purpose of the report is to bring to the committee's attention that Dorset Council could now use civil powers to enforce moving traffic offences, which previously only the police could enforce. There is no change to the nature or range of the restrictions that the Council could introduce as part of its network management or road safety duties, but camera enforcement could encourage better compliance. Further to note that this type of enforcement is solely through the use of cameras. The type of restrictions that may be enforced with cameras include, as we just heard, among others, yellow box junctions, no entry, left or right turn bans and traffic restrictions to different vehicle types, but it does not include speed limit contraventions, which remain the remit of the police, and parking offences, which will continue to be enforced by patrolling officers. Well, why might we want to do this? Used appropriately, MTE can support schemes which contribute to climate and air quality objectives by reducing the impact of traffic, to housing objectives by supporting sustainable transport options in new developments and residential areas, to economic priorities by supporting high street vitality and addressing issues of localised congestion, and to community objectives by improving road safety and supporting people-friendly streets. In practical terms, this might mean supporting school streets, removing the need for school staff to operate a physical barrier with benefits to climate, air quality and active travel to school, or a bus gate prioritising public transport by enabling buses to use direct low-traffic routes. It could mean addressing local congestion issues by making sure that box junctions in busy locations such as supermarkets or railway stations work as intended, or making sure that where there are restrictions to traffic or certain types of vehicle, that these restrictions are effectively enforced. We are at an early stage in this new approach to enforcement and are still gathering information to make sure that if we do begin MTE, that we do so in a way that is effective, proportionate and sustainable. To this end, and in line with Department for Transport advice, we are proposing a pilot in St Martin's Road, Upton, to enforce the existing school street. The school has struggled to consistently staff the barrier, and when the barrier is absent, compliance is poor. In line with government advice, we undertook a 6-week consultation exercise in April and May 2025. This showed that 2/3 of respondents supported or strongly supported camera enforcement at this location, whereas 1/4 of respondents opposed. We hope that the pilot will serve the dual purpose of enabling a permanent, sustainable solution for the school, while also generating valuable insights into the costs and benefits of camera enforcement in a Dorset context, which can be used to develop the policy and future business case. Before wrapping up, the bullet points on this slide list some of the factors under consideration. It is a general principle of enforcement that it should be fair and be seen to be fair. The purpose of legislation is compliance and not income generation. There must be a minimum 6-week consultation at every new location where cameras are to be introduced. This could be introduced as an addition to the existing policy on civil enforcement rather than as a standalone policy. The PCN, that's a penalty charge notice and appeal procedure, are similar to that for parking. We need to be mindful of the net costs and other resource implications, and perhaps also we need to be mindful of the visual impact of cameras, especially in historic high streets. Finally, I'd like to leave you with some questions that, in bringing the report before the committee, we hope to gain insight into before we go any further. These are, if you support the idea in principle, what your priority schemes and areas for enforcement are, if so, whether you think there is anything missing from the skeleton policy, any further opportunities we should be considering, any concerns that we need to address, and any other questions or general observations that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very thorough introduction, so thank you for that.
David Taylor is there.
Okay. Firstly, following our procedures, members who are not part of this committee get to go first in terms of asking questions. So is there anybody who's not a member of this committee who has a question that I want to raise on this? Councillor Brenton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brenton, one of the ward councillors for Upton and Litchfield. So this is in our ward, or the first proposal is in our ward. Can I ask, this appears to be, we're talking about a pilot. Are there plans to increase the number, move this across Dorset, or are we going to work on a one at a time basis as needs arise? And has there been any consultation with other counties or areas that have introduced these as to public acceptance and vandalism and things like that?
Hello, Chair. Michael Westwood, Parking Services Service Manager. I've been speaking to various other authorities to see how it's worked in other locations. There has been some instance of vandalism, as you'd imagine, particularly in some of the more urban areas. But on the whole, particularly when used correctly, it's been a good acceptance to it, because where you can show that it's providing safety benefits and improvements to the area, and people generally are quite happy that it comes in. And we have to reassure people again that this isn't going to be used as a cash cow. It's not for income generation. It is to support the safety and congestion issues that these areas cause. Oh, and from the point of view of other areas, this initially would be a trial area with an intention to use it as a sort of learning lessons exercise, to see some of that is understanding what the public's acceptance is once it's in place. Although we've done the consultation already with them before it's in place, often minds can change, can't they, when they physically see them on the road. So it'll be an opportunity to see how that works, see what that public acceptance is like, to then potentially spread it into other areas where needed. Though it's not going to be something we use every box junction or every right-hand turn. It's going to be where there's a genuine problem that needs resolving.
We do have 4 others.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, we do have 4 other school streets operating in Dorset, and we have others who would like to become school streets but don't have the capacity to staff barriers, which is the only option at present. So there's certainly interest in camera enforcement from other schools in Dorset.
Anybody else who's not a member of the committee? No, in which case members will go on to debate the issue and ask questions from the members who are on the committee. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor David Taylor, Shumson, St Mary. A couple of questions regarding the enforcement cameras, which I've noticed actually by driving down to Bridport and various other places that they're up, some of them. The colour of one of them is bright yellow, sticks out like a sore thumb, and is in a historical area of interest. Now, I don't like the idea of robotic cameras just standing in the middle of the pavement looking down on you, and it is quite obvious that they're there. They're not exactly discreet. And I know the thing is to enforce the traffic angle. I know what we're going for, but these things are enormous. And they're about, I think, 25 feet high, and they've got a camera stuck on the top of them, and that one there. The other thing as well, I've noticed that the Chiddock speed camera going into Chiddock from Bridport is now missing. That's one thing. Just to say that was now missing, and they're actually increasing on speed. So they're actually thinking there's nothing there anymore. And also the fact is that, basically just that. One of the, as was raised by Councillor Alex here, the fact is that what are the rollouts going on? Because I don't really know much about them. So therefore, it's not in my ward, admittedly, but we are Dorset councillors. I'd just like to know what's going on across the county. Thank you.
Michael Westwood, Service Manager, Parking Services again, Chair. The cameras that have been discussed there aren't the moving traffic offence cameras. I'm assuming they must be the variable speed cameras. Yeah. So the cameras we'd be using, we haven't picked a model yet or a design, so we haven't rolled any of these out, these particular types of enforcement cameras out yet today.
And presumably the ones in Chiddock are a highways agency, aren't they? And they're not. It's not this council responsible for that road. That road is part of the national network.
Well, just to come on back on that, then who's responsible for them? Because we haven't been enforced. Are they highways? What's going on? They think, I don't know where they're coming from.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. John Andrews, Police Services Cabinet Member. Thank you for that, Councillor Taylor. They're not our cameras. They're national highways, and they maintain them. Our cameras, as Mr. Westwood has said just now, have yet to be picked and designed and do whatever we need to do, but they will be sympathetic to the places they're installed
in. Go on, one more.
My question is then, Chair, is the fact that they're installing these things across Dorset. I don't have any notification about them, and nor does our councillors here. So what is going on? You know, these things are pretty ugly, and they're pretty tall, and they're pretty horrible. Well, why are highways not talking to us instead of just installing them? So that might be outside of this remit today, but I'm getting pretty moved. The fact is we have to work out where it all coming from. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you once again. As I said, it's National Highways. They have consulted us and told us that they were going to put them in. We didn't really have a say in that. And these are speed cameras. These are nothing to do with the school streets and box station cameras that we have got this paper on.
Thank you. Councillor Jesperson, I think, was next.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Sherry Jesperson, Hillforts and Upper Tarrants Ward. I think in answer to your first question on the slide, I think I would be comfortable supporting this in principle. It's another weapon in our armoury, isn't it? We're going to pilot it, and if it doesn't work, we don't have to use it, and the pilot will tell us how it does work. So I think it's certainly worth having a policy that allows us to do this. That would be helpful. The obvious downside is public resistance. That, you know, we've heard that sometimes these things get vandalised, and there is a resistance among some drivers, the perception that drivers are persecuted. I was lucky this morning that I was in a stream of traffic as I came here this morning, because the police were there with their speed van, and so I had already been slowed down by the previous traffic before I got there. So, you know, we all know what it's like to be caught on camera. Having said that, I have to say from the area that I represent, North Dorset rural wards, I have far more in my inbox and comment about the lack of compliance and the lack of enforcement of those TROs that we do have than I do from those motorists who feel persecuted. So I think, you know, if I'm talking for my residents, they are far more concerned about unsafe roads and the lack of compliance for those regulations that we are trying to put in place than they are about extra cameras. So it's a balance, but I think, on balance, I think it would be well worth trialling this. I do have a question about the costs, and then the comment about something that I'd like to know if this could eventually cover. On the costs, there will be, I know that there will be income generated from this that rolls straight back into this, but there will still be net costs to this, won't there? And there will also be a financial cost, but also in terms of, you said in your report about prioritising signage and road markings, because where these cameras are, we have to make sure that the signage and road markings are not degraded in any way, otherwise they're challengeable. We know that. So I would be concerned if what this policy did was divert resource and money from the work that is already a priority. It's already quite difficult to get our road markings and our signs repaired in time, the road markings kept up to scratch, and the standard below which they have to fail before they get attended to, that bar is already quite high, or maybe I mean quite low, but you know what I mean. So I would be concerned if we were diverting resources from things that were already a priority. So I guess my question is there extra resource to go in to support this pilot, or is there a risk that we will be sucking resources out of the work that's already prioritised? That's my first question, if I may.
Well, one of the things that we hope to get out of the pilot is a realistic understanding of the costs and benefits of doing it in each location, with a view to developing a business case. In terms of whether the ensuring that the signage and lines are compliant for the cameras would divert resources from other priority locations. I don't believe that would be the case, because in order to be enforceable, any TRO needs to have appropriate signage and lineage. So all we're talking about is the means of enforcement. It's not shifting direction. So as such, any TRO is in the same boat in needing to be appropriately signed and lined.
That's helpful. Could we just make a note then that could we make sure that we're monitoring that, because I think that would be an unintended consequence that we would like to avoid. So I'm just kind of flagging it up as a possibility. My next question is in terms of what I'd like to see this covering that it was not obvious to me from your report that it could cover, but I'd like to just put it out there. We've had in the recent flooding an enormous number of reports of people ignoring road closed signs. We also have in the Diners Hollow development some issues arising from drivers ignoring road closed signs. Now, the Diners Hollow, I appreciate, does have a TRO, so that could possibly obviously not that one, it will be over within the year, but a project like that could come within scope. Is there any way that we could use a facility like this for road closures that are serious but not long-term, like for flooding? Because we've had a massive issue of people. There seems to be the modern thing now. You've got a big modern car and you think a road closed sign doesn't apply to you. You can nip through or whatever. And that's caused enormous amount of danger and difficulty and extreme flooding. And it's not just flooding. There's all sorts of occasions where people ignore road closed signs. So is there a way that we could, this could help address that problem? Because not all of those road closures will have a full-blown TRO on them. I merely are.
I think we're still working out the total range of applications. However, at each new location where it's introduced, you do have to do a 6-week consultation period, which kind of limits the ability to be responsive in that kind of way. So I think in practical terms, it's not something we're looking at currently, although we'll keep our ears out and see what people in other local authorities are doing, because I know we've had similar inquiries from our highways improvements team about whether it could be used during roadworks, for example, where they've got persistent problems. But at the moment, we're looking at ones which are longer-term situations. And there is also a cost as well, so it's quite an expensive reactive solution.
You finished? Yes. Are we happy with that? Yes. Okay, thank you. Councillor Brown was next.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, but before that, to answer your question at the end of the slide deck, on a high-level principle, very supportive. I'm sure we all have experience of seeing some dubious driving. I think of recently I came across someone in their SUV going the wrong way down a one-way street, and when you try to be neighbourly and wind your window down to explain it to you, you get a robust response, let's put it that way. Maybe they weren't from Dorset. We're a bit politer down here, aren't we? I just want to pick up on one of my bugbears quickly. which is presentations from highways coming forward to this committee. And I'm sure the answer is going to be they're not in a priority order. But bullet point number 1 is this will help the climate. Important, yes. Road safety should be our main mantra in highways. And to me, what that indicates is the order in which those priorities came to mind when they wrote it on the piece of paper. So I just want to make that point. Road safety should be at the top of that list. A couple of questions. The first is the cost for deploying these cameras. And the next one is I'm not particularly clear from the paperwork what how widely the data is going to be spread from what they collect, how that we're going to minimize data collection while making sure that they are effective. So I guess predominantly I'm asking, will that data stay within the PCN team? Will that stay within Dorset Council? Will that stay within wider government? And how we're going to minimise data collection while ensuring that they are effective.
Well, Michael Westwood, Service Manager, Parking Services again, Chair. From a data perspective, the data we dealt with in the same way we do PCNs. So it'll be minimised to the appeals team, to that system. We've got a lot of things in place to ensure that data is safe, and it won't be going to sort of the wider government or to any wider groups. And as soon as we finish with that data, we destroy it as quickly as possible or eradicate it. We remove it from our system as quickly as possible. So it will be treated exactly the same as we do with all other PCNs.
Brilliant. We've mentioned interventions for things like box junctions. Dorset is one of the better highways authorities nationally. I think we'd all agree on that. But ultimately, I want to just highlight the point that Sherry was making, in that we need to make sure that we're not working to a 75% intervention level on those kind of junctions if we are going to enforce them. And on a personal level, I would like to see the cameras noticeable and visible, because ultimately the aim of the camera is not to hold out a fine. We really want the camera to not be handing out any fines, because that means we're getting 100% compliance. So actually getting the balance right, in the middle of lovely Wimborne, we don't want a massive 20-foot yellow pole, of course, but we also want to make sure that road users, both local and visiting, are aware of them. I did ask in terms of what the cost is of deploying one of the systems, and then the other one is just an observation. I feel uncomfortable with there being an incentive for the wider highways team that the profit generated from the fines will be reinvested back into the highways budget. We know how stretched and rightly desperate highways are for fines, and I feel uncomfortable with us putting that incentive structure in there for the team from day one. And I appreciate that's a political.
Michael Westwood, Parking Service Manager again, Chair. From the profit side of things, we're not seeing these as a profit-making opportunity. The price of the cameras, maintaining the cameras, and the level of resource needed to manage the PCNs, what's been noted in other authorities is they'll just about wash their faces. Particularly when we're talking about school streets, what they tend to do is work. So fines very quickly dry up, and you're only picking the odd one now and again. Whenever they're initially deployed as well, there's a 6-month grace period. So within that 6-month period, rather than sending out fines for your first offence, we only send out warning notices to give people a chance to get used to them being there. It's all part of that fairness attitude. So yeah, this definitely isn't going to end up bringing a lot of money into highways. It's what my aim is, that we do enough in the safety-related areas and areas where we've got real problems that we get compliance, and we're not really receiving anything out of them at all, other than one would hope there's enough to keep them running without having to input any more resource to it. But I think that's about as far as they'll go, is they'll wash their face.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, does that answer your questions? Thank you very much. Next, David Northam.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor David Northam, Upwell Broadway in Weymouth. I'm very supportive of this as another weapon in the armoury to make our roads safer and more usable. I share the concerns about money, but I'm happy that the pilot is there to help us understand that. I'm disappointed that the list of things which you can do it doesn't include 20-mile-an-hour zones, but fine, move on. School congestion, to me, you asked where should a priority be, and I think school congestion is a really good example. And the reason is it not only stops normal traffic, it also represents a significant risk of children being injured crossing the road from behind parked vehicles on the rest. So my first question is can we actually look at those priority school areas? I have 4 schools in my ward, and one of them is a 2-form entry with the largest catchment area. It attracts a lot of parking, and those who are in the know don't use Radipole Lane at certain times of the day. The second question is about 5-ton limits, which are no entry if you're of a 5-ton vehicle and over. With so much development going on in the Weymouth area, we have lots of developers and particularly their subcontractors using such roads as cut-throughs when other roads are congested. And there seems to be very little enforcement of this, so I'd welcome that as another category where, because developments take several years, so you can meet your 6-week period, you can do this. I'd really welcome that as another consideration. So are we going to be looking at putting such signs up to monitor the persistent breaches of 5-ton limit roads? Because I think that's a huge problem. Thank you.
Michael Westwood, Service Manager, Parking Services. Yes, it's within the opportunities of the cameras is to control weight limits. But again, it will be something we'll look at, and we'll have to do it as a sort of safety-led, priority-based. Where do the problems exist? How big are those problems? And hence the reason for running this trial initially. How it rolls out from there, we'll learn lessons from the trial and see where we go from there. But yeah, it's certainly another place where there's an opportunity to look at camera-based enforcement.
Thank you. Did you want to follow up further, I think?
Specifically, I accepted, thank you. I think school congestion should be a priority, just make that point again. And my second priority is about entering into roads that you shouldn't, with such as 5-ton limits, which causes significant problems. Again, country lanes, we have country lanes within Weymouth, and they're particular problems, people using them as cut-throughs. So I'd like some assurance. We were asked to recommend what the priorities might be, and so I'm making a recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Simon Gibson from Verwood. On principle, very supportive. This has come about because, as I understand it, there was finally a legislative change from Westminster which gave us additional powers. I think had this been available to us 5-10 years ago, this paper would have arrived 5 or 10 years ago, because I don't know any sensible council that would turn down the opportunity to enforce the things that they want to see done on the highway. So this is something that we really ought to support. So thank you for bringing it forward. I was aware from my time working with the team a while ago when we were looking at the issues around the first school in Upton, that experimental TRO was put in place to try and deal with some really specific traffic problems around school time there. It seemed to have worked relatively well, but I see from the report that there's capacity issue from the school, that it's placing a burden on the school, which means that the principle of it is being undermined. So if you can use technology for that, that's a modern council using technology well, so fully support. In terms of priorities, I agree with Councillor Northam. If I was to try and pick out from the list of where you'd like to use it, in and around the school setting strikes me as the most sensible place. I think can be very chaotic at times there, and I think cameras in particular give us a good chance there, because if you were to enforce it by patrolling officers, you can only be in so many places at the exact same time every day. So camera use strikes me as very sensible. If I was to pick a next one, I'd quite like, I think in the list on point 4, it talks about failing to comply with proceed in direction signs. To my mind, is that where, for example, you've got something on the road where priority is given to one direction of travel, so one side has to wait while the other side drives through? Is that what that means?
Yes, it can be. More typically, no left-hand turn, no right-hand turn, those sorts of directional.
Thank you. For me, that's a big priority. I know increasingly that some of the interventions we're doing to slow down speed give priority to one direction over another. There's one that was put in Verwood that it works relatively well on Manor Road, but there is a compliance issue there with people not waiting their turn when the signs say they should. And I would hope that this would be the sort of thing that could, if the problem was to persist long term, could potentially be in scope and given some priority, because there's no point in us putting something in if we can't enforce it. And that's, given that it's a moving traffic thing, that strikes me as something I'd like to see given priority. The other, so in principle, happy. Sherry and Piers covered my concerns around what it might be taking away from, because ultimately every PCN has to be administered by someone. There's almost certainly a person based in the appeals process, which I know a lot of people avail themselves of. So it is just making sure that it gets the balance right within general enforcement capacity, because I know it's not the biggest team. And whilst all of these things are good, I still think enforcement of parking and enforcement of speeding, I know not all done by the council, are the two big ticket items. But this is just another part of it. I've got two quick questions about on point 5 in the report. It talks about the enforcement method. 5.2 says 6 months for each new traffic, in essence like a bedding in process. I do understand that, and I think that definitely ticks the box, Laura, that you were saying about fairness. I know I'm a little bit draconian at times when it comes to enforcement on parking. I think a lot of councillors are, because it fills our inbox. My firm belief is that if you've gone through a 6-week mandatory consultation period and you've signed and lined it as accurately as you have to, that is fairness. So my approach with enforcement would always be firm but fair, and no need for a 6 months trial basis. Basically, if you break the rules, you're fined. Perhaps that's a little bit hard line, but if we are clear with what we expect from drivers, then from day one, anyone with a valid driving licence should be able to read road signs. Then the other one is just asking about 5.3. It talks about the PCN notices, and the civil enforcement officers may not issue moving traffic PCNs on street. Just interested to know why that is. Is that a choice, or is that from the Highways Act?
Michael, Service Manager, Parking Services. No, that's part of the legislation. We're not allowed to use an officer to enforce these particular things. Our officers have to view the video, back at the desk, if you like, and the systems out there are designed to just show them the times when someone's done something wrong, so they can quite quickly go through there. Some authorities do choose to what they call a monitored video system, so there's literally a camera out there and there's someone watching that camera, all the time it's running, at the times they're expecting offences to happen. But no, so we can't issue, when we see it, it has to be through that camera-based evidence, because of the way in which it records the infringement. Obviously, a human can walk up to a car, look at it, see it's parked, take some photographs, it's parked. With a moving vehicle, it's a video of it moving through and carrying out the infringement. And certainly, although there will be an extra demand on the resource within the team, in some aspects this will free up resource within the team. At the moment, there's over 400 schools in Dorset. We get a lot of demand from them to go and help out and try and stop the problems they've got. Where appropriate and cameras can be used, it will mean we haven't got to send a physical person to that site. We can allow the technology to do the work for us and free those people up to perhaps go and enforce some parking or somewhere else where we can't use this type of enforcement tool.
Does that answer your points? Sorry.
It does. Just one final point from you. Thank you. I assumed it'd be the case, which is a shame. I wish government trusted councils a lot more than they do to just enforce across the board as we, the experts, see fit. But that's a matter for another day and in another place. The only final thing is if we were to prioritise in and around school areas, it'd be really interesting to see if given that there's both a cost in terms of putting the cameras up, there's in essence a sort of capital cost in putting all of the infrastructure in place. Then there's the ongoing revenue cost of maintenance, monitoring, and the staff time. If a school, which as I understand it currently bears some of the costs if they wanted to do some of the safety stuff in and around the school campus, wanted to work with the council to try and meet some of the costs in terms of implementation, would we consider that? And would we consider that as a way of perhaps moving some projects forward that our budget might not allow? In essence, could we work with schools to try and make sure that we get it across more areas if they'd be willing to help us with the costs?
Michael Westwood, Parking Services Service Manager again. In a nutshell, yes, we'd be happy to work with schools and equally with towns and parish councils if they have particular problem areas and wanted to help finance these cameras. And I think we'd be silly to say no to that sort of help.
Thank you for that. Councillor Jesperson, did you want to add a point there?
Yes, thank you. You've just answered, I think, a point that I was going to raise in terms of shared costs with town councils. At the moment, if town councils have close their high streets to traffic, that's a cost that they bear. So I think this is would turn out to be a really good use of this facility, but I think we should be looking for that cost to be shared with the town council. Otherwise, it's a cost that was formerly theirs that will become ours. So I think that I think we would want that to go forward as a recommendation that's in the policy somewhere. I think that because I think there's a general concern about costs here, and because resources are so limited, that's why there's concern about cost. And just the final point, just to support what Councillor Gibson just said, it did make me raise my eyebrows very slightly when I saw the 6 months grace period. Would not 3 months be adequate? It just seems to me, I'm being slightly less draconian than my colleague behind, but 6 months seems longer than is really necessary. We will have been through an elaborate process. And there is a kind of assumption that drivers should obey, and giving them a 6 months, does it not slightly undermine our confidence and our authority here by saying, well, we'll give you 6 months grace? We're not really sure we should be doing this. I think we are. We should sound confident. So I would propose either no grace period if you want to be really draconian, or at most 3 months would be a recommendation. Thank you.
Mike West, Parking Service Manager. Unfortunately, we do have to give them the 6 months, but it's not 6 months for everybody. Once in that 6 month period, once you've committed that offence once, so if, for example, you drive through a school street when you shouldn't, then that's it. That's your one get out of jail free card spent, if you like. And systems are able to pick up on that, where a car does a second offence in the first 6 months, then we can issue a fine to them.
Councillor Apothecary next, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Val Apothecary, Gillingham Ward. Generally, I'm very supportive of this proposal. Lots of my questions have already been answered, actually, satisfactorily, I would say. I'm interested in the timescale. If we support this proposal and so does Cabinet, and it goes through, when would we expect to see this happening on the ground, please?
Microprocess Parking Services, Service Manager. Yeah, that's exactly what I say, September. So it'll be after the school summer holidays. The other thing that's delaying it slightly is we need to bring in our new parking system, which we're in the process of doing at the moment anyway. We're in the process of looking at procurement for that. Our current system won't manage moving traffic offences. That needs to be in place, and we need to make sure it's a system that takes a lot of those sort of failure steps out of the process to make it as easy as possible for us to manage from a resource point of view. So it's going to be embracing the technology of the cameras, but in the same breath embracing the technology of a system that will work alongside them.
I'm not really cynical, Chairman, but September 26th. Thank you.
Oh, ye of little faith, I think. Yeah. Right, yeah, Vice Chairman, you want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Andrew Starr, Litton and Upton. So this trial, this pilot location is right in my ward. So you picked a rather difficult one to start with, having been a school, but it's quite easy to say if a car's in one of those box zones, it is or it isn't. But how do you deal with the fact that you have people living outside the school and people accessing their property, maybe people delivering, and but presumably it will be just time specific for the time of day when you've got the kids going there and leaving out obviously the holidays, etc. Thank you.
In a word, yes, it's time specific, but we also you can build what we call in the industry is a whitelist within them. So there will be sort of registered number plates for people who are allowed to enter that zone, be it because they live there, or if, for example, they've got disabled children and have to take their car into the school. So we can build up that exemption list that runs within it. So that should automatically not pick up those people if they go through the camera.
What about someone delivering a parcel or something, or someone visiting? Is that be out of bounds?
Yeah, for ad hoc visitors, I mean, they could appeal against if they felt there was a valid reason for appealing against the ticket, then it would run through the normal appeal system. But typically, yeah, that road is closed for the variety of traffic that's set out within the order during the set times.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. You've all had a good say on that one. Go on, Councillor Crabb. No, Crabb.
Councillor Crabb, Sherborne West Ward. I'd just like to say that I'm very much in support of this scheme. I think that it's a very good idea to have this pilot. One thing I would like to understand, and it may not be able to come about now, is to have an idea of what the costs are. Say, for example, we've got a main street in Sherborne. We do sometimes have cars coming up the wrong way. If we wanted to contribute towards a camera, roughly, what would be the cost? But I expect you don't have that right now anyway, so that's something to bear in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, that's something we're going to work up through the trial period over the summer. We're going to look at a variety of different options, camera-wise, but making sure that it fits in and works with the new system. So we'll have a clearer idea of costs once we get the system and the trial underway, because sometimes there's that initial capital cost, but it's understanding what the ongoing costs are on top of that as well, the maintenance costs, how long does it actually take to carry out the enforcement side of things.
And I presume you report back to us with the results of this in 6 months' time or 9 months' time, whatever it is required. Yeah.
Jack Wiltshire, Corporate Director for Highways and Engineering. What the paper requests, or the plan from the paper, is with the recommendations here, we are looking to go directly to Cabinet obviously, the committee does have the option to make other recommendations should they wish.
I just wanted to make sure that the data doesn't get lost. That if we're running pilots, that there's some further member involvement at some point down the line. Okay, right. Anybody else? Councillor Taylor, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just popping up on some observations by what councillors have been saying throughout this afternoon. I've got some series of questions, actually, because I've been overviewing what's been going on with this. I do like this idea. I think it's great to enforce this, to give us more security on our roads, to make sure our children and adults are safe, and people travelling through Dorset are safe as well if they follow the law. And that's what I want to get a hold of on this one here. A couple of observations which I wanted to point out was that if we have a problem with the dual carriageway coming into Dorchester from Poole, if there's a problem with the blockage, they go straight to Bockhampton, use the bridges, tonnage storages, 10, 15, 20 tonnes go over a half tonne or 1 tonne or 5 tonne bridges. So it's enforcement I'm trying to get here is the question I'm trying to get underneath. Other subjects as well. For example, like if you go to line readers, you play with your death to go to the high street line readers to go from one end to the other for the majority car to go forward first. That's one. And Sturminster Newton. They're planning last week, and we were fighting to try and get through because someone was offloading a lorry in the junction. So it was an absolute nightmare there. Plus the fact is yesterday when I was coming to the High West Street and the High Street of Dorchester, someone with a disabled sticker was parked on the chevrons on the pedestrian crossing. So therefore, enforcement is the key here. We may be putting through these possibilities to make our roads safer. It's the enforcement angle I want to see a bit more toughened up, to be quite honest, because it seems to be that people come here and do whatever they like, and not driving the right speeds as well. Coming on to Councillor Jefferson's saying about the road blockages and make sure people don't go down there. As we have seen on the news being portrayed, there are cars and lorries going down high streets very fast, swamping their water, going into people's houses and creating mayhem and damage. So therefore, again, it's enforcement, which I would like to see stronger on this, to make sure we may be putting through these conditions, laws, procedures. Great, I love it, because it keeps us safe. But the thing is that, are we enforcing it properly? And sometimes I think we're not, because it's not our fault. We kind of 24-hour police, 365 days all across the UK road system. But I think it's about time we educated our drivers what they should and shouldn't be doing in our county. And finally on that one there, I was going to come on the pollution. Now, we've already spoken about the fact that I mistakenly put one of the junctions with highways instead of the road system with Dorset Council, but I still see the possibility of furniture on the roads, junctions. There's way too much. You get lost in it. You get a fog. It's called a fog, I think it's called, driver fog, where you can't see anything for the trees because there's too many signs. So therefore, we need to look at this correctively and decisively say what we put in, and I welcome it, but it needs to be seen and probably adhered to so people can't get the condition saying, I didn't see it. And they do that a lot. And then the police have to work out how they can make sure they did see it. So it's a court enforcement. So those are some police questions, but also observations across the whole board. And I hope that it can help you in some way because we would welcome it and I would welcome this very much. Thank you.
Did you want to make a comment on
come back on that one. From an enforcement perspective, there is only certain things that we can enforce within the parking team, and when it comes to traffic, but things like these cameras will free up enforcement officer time and enable us to do more of that. We're also looking to recruit further enforcement officers so we can carry out more enforcement in the very sort of locations you're talking about, so we can expand that. And we're doing some work at the moment with, like I say, the system, so we can sort of bring ourselves into the current century and have really efficient tools for the team so they can work as effectively and efficiently as possible around enforcement. And you're very right in what you say with the over build-up of signs. We need to make sure that whenever we're putting in new signs or cameras, that we're not leaving it in a confused state. So we're leaving it in a rational manner, so there's enough there to inform the driver, but not too much that it's lost in a field of other signs. So yeah, it's about rationale, about ensuring that we've got the right number of signs before we can, so we sit within legislation correctly, but not too many that it's lost. The picture is lost, so you're not sure what you're supposed to do.
Thank you. I think we've had a very thorough debate. Go on then.
Just very small point, a recommendation if the committee thinks it's appropriate. Presumably in due course, AI will have a key part to play in the initial look, initial monitoring of the cameras, and just, you know, because obviously that's a lot easier than having a person looking at hours and hours of video when nothing happened, nothing went wrong. I think our residents would want an assurance that going forward, there's always going to be a human intervention here. These are sensitive matters, and I don't think people would be very comfortable if they thought that in a year or two from now we'd moved into a position where a bot was giving them a PCN. So can we have an assurance that the use of AI will be really useful? I get that, but that there will always be the last pair of eyes on it will be human. Thank you.
Yeah, just to confirm that, the systems we'll be looking at will pick out the contraventions and show those videos to an officer. So it will be, you know, someone who's trained to be a civil enforcement officer, trained to look at those contraventions, trained to say, yes, that person is in contravention or not, because you are right in what you say. You know, it does need that human eye, and that's still part of the legislation. It can't be the computer is automatically sending out letters to people.
Thank you very much. I think there's been a very thorough debate and very, very good ideas. What we have on paper before us is a series of recommendations. We start off with sending our report to the Cabinet, and also priorities, and I think you were asking for that, and I think there's a clear, overwhelming consensus about running pilots at schools, and so I think that would be really useful thing to do. And the other point I'm sure you've picked up on from other members, so thank you very much for that. Can I see all those in favour of going for the recommendation? Thank you very much. Any against? No. In which case, thank you very much. Right then, on then to item 7, cultural strategy. Paul, do you want to lead us into this?
Thank you, Chair. Paul Rutter, Service Manager for Leisure, Arts and Cultural Services. Good morning, members. Today I'm presenting the third version of the Dorset Cultural Strategy, the second since the formation of Dorset Council. Whilst a cultural strategy is not a statutory requirement, it's certainly considered to be best practice, and it's certainly something that national bodies such as the Arts Council and the National Heritage Lottery Fund are very keen to see cultural strategies in a place, and it certainly helps with inward investment into the county, and Dorset receives around £5 million a year from those organisations. In terms of the strategy itself, this isn't a Dorset Council strategy. Dorset Council is a key stakeholder and has been a key stakeholder in the development of the strategy. Having the available resource to support the sector, Dorset Council's been at the forefront of this production. Dorset Council provides grant funding to the sector, a number of different grants, but as I think you can all appreciate, it's the cultural sector themselves that deliver most of what you see on your streets and in your neighbourhoods. So it's been really, really critical that we've had extensive and collaborative engagement with our cultural sector, and you'll see from one of the appendices the level of engagement that's taken place. From a Dorset Council perspective, we're obviously very keen to ensure that the strategy is closely aligned to our council plan and the priorities and ambitions of the strategy that do align with the Dorset council plan. And also it's critical that it aligns to some of those national policies as well to ensure that we continue to receive that inward investment. This is, in terms of, from a Dorset Council perspective, as I touched on a moment ago, we do provide grant funding to support the sector over a number of different types of grant funding. And for us, it's an opportunity to use this strategy to help shape the criteria for that grant funding. So that's how we will contribute towards the delivery, by supporting the sector to deliver on the priorities. You'll note that within the delivery plan, there's a 1 year of delivery plan recommendations. This will be an iterative process. The strategy will be for 5 years. So as you can appreciate, it allows some flex and for the priorities to evolve over the life of the strategy. You'll also note that there's an appendix around governance arrangements. These are not formal governance arrangements because, as I said, this is a strategy that's essentially owned by the sector. It's a collaborative strategy, and no one organisation is able to force anyone else into complying with it. But that's the whole point of it being a collaboration, and that's why we've spent the last probably 12 months engaging with the sector and consulting with the sector to ensure that what we have is something that everyone is wanting to buy into. As I said, in terms of the grant funding, we can take advantage of the priorities within the strategy to encourage the sector to support the delivery of that strategy. It's an ambitious strategy, but it's also dependent on the continuation of funding support both locally and nationally. And that will obviously be critical over the life of the strategy. Today, essentially, we're looking for support for the strategy and looking to recommend the strategy to Cabinet for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, we have people who are not members of the committee. Anyone wants to ask a question? Councillor Brenton.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brenton, Litchfield Upton. Okay. I am very interested in the cultural strategy, and I read it some time ago, and I read it again this morning. It is a lovely document, but it's a bit too lovely. It's all, everybody's going to do this, and we're going to support that, and this is going to happen, and we've got lots of principal shareholders, but not much about how. It's, we will support. Particularly, town councils will be supported to put on cultural events. This may work in the larger market towns where they already have the sort of infrastructure to do these things, but I don't see much push for helping parish councils of the larger villages or towns like Upton, which don't even have a centre, so therefore nowhere to have anything. There doesn't seem to be much engagement there about how's it going to happen here. So that's my question is how. I would like more information. And if we're talking about supporting parishes and town councils, is this financial or just by sending somebody to give them some advice? That would be my question. The other point is on, and I'm going back to the beginning, there's a few points, and it does say in the cultural, why we need it. New houses need cultural activities. Bearing in mind what planning is having to put up with at the moment, very large new estates on small villages which have lost their pubs, lost their shops, lost their school. How are we going to support new arts and cultural activities in those villages? Because they don't just need advice, they need help. Thank you. So it's how.
Thank you for your question. Paul Rutter, Service Manager for Leisure, Arts and Cultural Services. So I guess first and foremost, I presume that your question is to the whole sector as opposed to just Dorset Council, because as I said, this strategy isn't just Dorset Council. But if I can certainly answer it from a Dorset Council perspective. In terms of support and engagement with town and parish councils, through the process, we engage with town and parish councils. In terms of support, this strategy, if they align the work that they choose to do in the cultural space to what's within this strategy, it would certainly help their case to get external funding from national bodies. In terms of Dorset Council, we provide a range of grants, project grant funding, capital leverage type funding. So capital leverage, for example, supports infrastructure in town and parishes, can be village halls and things like that, where their activities are being put on. In terms of officer support, we have officers that are able to give advice, guidance and support in terms of grant applications to funders, but certainly any sort of support that for the town and parish council. We're not, other than those grant funding pots that I've mentioned, otherwise it's certainly there's not direct funds that are given to town and parish councils. You'll know that we have funded Towns of Culture, where we've provided funding for towns and parishes. That's available to them. In terms of the housing, whilst this isn't my specialised subject, obviously there is things such as SIL funding, community infrastructure levy funding, and where there is development and where there is a need for improved infrastructure, whether that be cultural, whether that be leisure services, there are opportunities available along those lines to support that. Apologies if I've missed anything. Is there anything that I've missed?
Back. Thank you. It would be nice to have seen that sort of in the strategy, that what Dorset Council will do as a key partner in this strategy. And following on from that, would it be possible in future to have a breakdown of what grants went to which parishes for cultural support? Market towns, yes, they're thriving, they're getting on very well, but if we are a largely rural county, as we keep saying, but the rural bits tend to be the smaller and larger villages. And if we want to promote our climate change plan and all that sort of stuff, we would like people to have activities in their own area rather than having to drive 15 miles to an Arts Reach event in the other end of the county. There's no mention in the partners and such like of Art Reach, which is actually one of the cultural teams, organisations that actually does reach or tries to reach rural villages. And it's a shame that it all goes, towns of culture and things like that. You can't be a town of culture if you're not a town. Thank you. So it's could we have more information on what Dorset has actually done?
If I can come back on that, Chair. Yes, so in terms of our grant funding, we currently do have a breakdown of where that funding is based to areas, as in the old former districts, whether that be east, north, but we certainly could provide more detailed information on that. We have a web page where we put our grant funding and details on there. In terms of, you mentioned the great work that Arts Reach do. From a Dorset Council perspective, Arts Reach receive revenue support grant funding from Dorset Council. They actually receive the most amount of money of all our recipients. And whilst we, and I guess that's where Dorset Council is providing that grant funding, and that then enables organisations like Arts Reach to try and reach some of those more rural locations that ordinarily wouldn't necessarily have a hive of activity, but certainly trying to address some of those cold spots. And that's been another key priority of the current strategy, is to ensure that there is a balanced distribution of grant funding across the Dorset Council area. And one of the things we've done is where we have had cold spots, we've tried to target those areas and provide support to those areas, whether it be through applications for funding, advice, to try and enable them to also get that funding that's available.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. And next person, Jesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Sherry Jesperson, Hillforts and Upper Tarrants Ward. I absolutely very much welcome this strategy. It builds on the previous strategies. Culture was part of my portfolio when I had the economic development and tourism portfolio at North Dorset District Council, so I've been a long-time supporter of the contribution that culture, in the widest sense, makes to life in Dorset, but also to the local economy, and we shouldn't underestimate how important activity under this umbrella is to the local economy, both people who live here and also the people who come visiting here. So I'm very pleased to see it. And I absolutely support it. In terms of specific points, I understand what Councillor Brenton was just saying, though I have to say I take a slightly different view on that. Dorset Council does provide grant funding to cultural institutions and to town and parish councils. But I actually don't think that's really what Dorset Council is here to do, is to fund, is to help town and parish councils with their cultural activity. I think the best thing Dorset Council could do is get out of the way and let them get on with it. And this goes back to the conversation we've had earlier in the context of this committee, which I think we're going to come back to. What Dorset Council needs to do is look at the obstacles that we sometimes put in the way of villages and small towns in terms of doing things, and say, do we really need to make life so hard? I'm thinking of how hard and expensive it is sometimes if you want to close a road just to have your children parade down it on St. George's Day, as they do in my village, and if you want to advertise or put up something advertising your village fete and so on. You know, all of those things, Dorset Council it can be quite interventionist, whereas actually what would be quite helpful is just get out the way and let the villagers get on with it. And again, Councillor Brenton said that the villages, the market towns are all right, but the villages struggle. I have to say, in my experience, I find the opposite of that. Most of the villages do really quite well. They have communities that are pretty good at organising cultural events. Where there are sometimes it's much harder is in some of our market towns, certainly across the north, that do struggle. Some of them they can be a bit of a cultural desert, frankly, whereas the villages are between Arts Week, but I'm looking at something like Dorset Arts Weeks, which happens in villages all across, hundreds of villages all across Dorset, and things like Oborne Opera and so on. So the villages do have a lively cultural hinterland, I think, and they're doing very well. And I think more money would be fabulous, but actually there isn't any more money, is there? So I think we need to do, as has been suggested, be very, very equitable with where the limited amount of actual funding goes, and I think we do that. But then really just be encouraging, be a facilitator, rather than thinking we have to help them, we have to do it for them, because actually I think they're doing fine without what we could do is just get out of the road and let the towns, villages get on with it. So yeah, I think it's an encouraging strategy, and I think it describes really quite a thriving cultural community. Could do more, could do better, but I don't see it. I don't see this as an area of Dorset that is not thriving. I do have a particular question, and that is on page 56, under place. You reference, and this is a question about directly for Dorset Council, not the wider cultural community. You talk about identifying capital infrastructure needs for each town aligned to the wider economic development plans. I would like to know what exactly we mean by that, because that's quite a big promise. I'm thinking of towns like my colleague's town here, Gillingham, where the thing they most need is a venue. So if you have a venue like Sturmston Newton, that's fabulous. If you don't have a venue at all and you're a market town, that's really problematic. And it's not a thing that a town council is likely to be able to rustle up the funding to build a whole new arts centre all by themselves. So could we have a little more meat on what we meant by identify capital infrastructure needs for each town? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jesperson. Paul Rutter, Service Manager for Leisure, Arts and Cultural Services. Just before I go to your question, if I can go to your first points that you made around the grant funding and everything else, which sort of links to your question to a certain extent, is that we don't provide full funding for anything. So everything that we do is around trying to support the leveraging of further funding. And so there is a requirement, whether it be town and parishes, whether it be cultural organisations, to often find 80% of the fund. So we try, and I guess that's where we come back to that support element. In terms of infrastructure, I guess there's two elements to this. As an existing sector, they struggle with their current infrastructure. So if they've got art centres and things like that, it's the being able to continue to afford them and continue to maintain them, and that's certainly a challenge for the sector. So it's being mindful of trying our best collectively to enable that. In terms of new investment, that new investment isn't necessarily going to be coming from Dorset Council, but it's about making that case to organisations like the Arts Council that we are identifying a need, a place that has a need that either an investment in their existing infrastructure, or certainly, as you mentioned with, say, Gillingham, the need for new infrastructure. Again, there are other pots around Section 106 and SIL where there is an opportunity maybe for the council to potentially make a contribution towards that infrastructure. But again, it would be very much looking on and relying on and making the case for that external funding from much larger organisations like the Arts Council and National Lottery Heritage Fund.
Does that answer your points?
Very briefly, thank you very much for that. I mean, in terms of new facilities, I suppose one of the things that on the back of this strategy and an understanding of how important culture is for local communities, we could, from this committee, as an aside, send a message to assets to say one of the things that they could helpfully do is look favourably on using Dorset Council land to support cultural initiatives, not just the more obvious things like economic development or housing development, but actually cultural development might be, because one of the things I don't have in mind a specific piece of land in the Gillingham area, but land, if Dorset Council provided the land, that would make it a lot easier for a town to fund something like that over a long period of time. It's just a thought. It's just maybe something we can put in our minutes that assets might like to think about. But other than that, no, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson next.
Thank you very much, Councillor Simon Gibson, representing Verwood. Broadly the same as Sherry, I support the strategy. I'm pleased that we do have a strategy. I agree it's best practice, even if it's not statutory. And culture is something that I think Dorset does above averagely well. I think whether it be the main ongoing places of culture, Jurassic Coast, the Tank Museum, or whether it's the events that we do. And I really see events from an economic growth standpoint as being a real area that we can continue to do even more on. I think Dorset's really well placed to host some great events, as well as protecting the local events that happen in our villages and towns on an annual basis. One of the things that I wanted to just support was Dorset Council's involvement in protecting space for culture. I've always felt on a point of principle that politicians, and therefore the councils that they run, aren't always the best gatekeepers of what culture looks like. When politicians get involved in culture, it tends to dilute a lot of the real benefits that it can give. But I agree that we need to be involved in it somehow. So therefore, the working with the sector for this strategy rather than owning it entirely ourselves does make sense. But where we can play a role in is protecting the spaces that culture thrives in. And your town and village halls, especially at times of rising costs on energy, I think there is more that we can do to make sure that those spaces stay protected, because there's no point in having great and thriving cultural heritage if there's nowhere for it to be exhibited. So it's just to make that point. I know it's in the strategy, but I'd like to see it be given as much emphasis as possible. I did have a couple of questions around the council's relationship with the sector. And forgive me, some of this is my ignorance rather than a pointed question. My understanding was that typically we've worked quite closely with the Arts Development Company and David Lockwood's team, who, from my experience, seems to have done a very good job on arts and culture in Dorset. What is our relationship with them? Because I can see in the delivery plan that they're mentioned at various points, but it's not quite clear to me exactly who is responsible for what. Are we taking on more of what the Arts Development Company used to do, or do we still have the same relationship that we did previously have with them?
Paul Rutter, Service Manager for Leisure Arts and Cultural Services. In terms of the Arts Development Company, we currently have a 5-year SLA arrangement with them to deliver a arts guidance and support service, so essentially supporting the sector. As that runs until the end of September. From that point, the council is going to deliver that service in-house, and will be recruiting additional officers to deliver that work. That said, and I can't answer on behalf of Arts Development Company at the moment, but I am scheduled to meet with them shortly to understand where they will play a part in the future. So my understanding is that there is a desire and aspiration for them to continue as an organisation, and it would just be understanding how we can continue to work in partnership with them for the greater good of the cultural sector.
Thank you very much. Well, it'll be interesting to be kept updated on how that conversation goes in due course. If it stands that actually the council isn't always the best holder of culture and art, I've always felt that funding an external, slightly impartial body gave us a great opportunity to allow culture to thrive. So I'm interested that some of it's coming potentially back in-house from as soon as September. I'd be interested to know who made that decision. Because, from an instinct, that's always been something that the council did well in sending out into the wider community. So I'd be interested to know why that decision was taken. Is it cost related? A direct question, are we spending as much in the forthcoming year on culture as we did in previous years?
In terms of costs, there will be a cost saving of £50,000 a year that was within the budget setting process, although it will be £25,000 for this giving year, for this coming year, because it's a half year. But we believe that we can still deliver the same level of service for that reduced cost.
Thank you very much. If you indulge me a couple more questions. On what basis do we think we're best placed to do that to the same standard for less money? If we can, that's terrific. I must admit, that does make me nervous. So on what basis do you think we can do that?
I think first and foremost, it gives us the control over that budget and what's happening with it, without wanting to go into the inner details of the contractual arrangement. But there has been a depletion in staff numbers with ADC over a period of time. The grant funding has remained the same. So it's very difficult. We don't have that complete control on how they are necessarily spending that money, whereas this by managing the budget in-house, we have full control over that budget.
Does that answer your points? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Brown next.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Piers-Brown, Cranbourne Chase Ward. Councillor Gibbleson has needled the arts company point, I think, quite well, so I'll leave it there. But I had a really high-level question in terms of what do you see the role of sport being in culture and heritage? Because it's not really mentioned at all, and I would imagine as either participation or viewing, it's got to be one of our most popular categories of culture. So I was just wondering if you could explain your thought process around that.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Paul Rutter, Service Manager for Leisure Arts and Culture. So it's a very interesting question, and it was a question in the previous cultural strategy iteration that was discussed and talked about and was very topical again when this strategy was pulled together. And one of the key things that we try to identify is what do we define by culture and what do we see that sits within that umbrella. And I acknowledge that, you know, sport can sit within that, under that umbrella, but we were conscious of trying to ensure that it was very much sort of aligned to the more traditional, clearer type of cultural activity. And the reason being for that is that we do have, and we are bringing forward, there's a number of sort of leisure and sport strategies. So it's almost that, yes, we've got all sorts of playing pitch strategies, built facilities strategies, leisure facility strategy, and that's the place where we have identified to pick up the sport and the leisure and the activity, and to ensure that the cultural strategy is sort of narrowed, I guess, to what's considered to be the sort of key sort of activities under that. And as I say, this was something, you know, I go back to the point, this isn't a Dorset Council strategy, this is very much working collectively and collaboratively with the sector. And that determination was very much discussed and sort of at an early stage to determine what do we mean by culture and what do we want to focus on as part of that cultural strategy.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, and I fully get that because I've been weighing it up over the last couple of days in terms of, you know, I do think sport is cultural, but equally I also think that it could end up being so gargantuan within the strategy that it ends up dwarfing some of the other stuff. But I hope that in terms of things like performative sport will still be covered under sort of those headings in the same way that performative music or events would be, because they are, I think, part of our cultural, in a more traditional definition of the word, part of our cultural offer. You know, if you come down to watch a football match, I won't pick a team, but, you know, for the sake of upsetting anyone, but that is a cultural experience in the same way that going to a gig is, or going to a literary festival or anything in between. But I also just wanted to pick up on live culture and live events that, you know, I think we should be making a lot more of that and supporting the delivery of those events. And I know across many of our wards, we will have seen the number of those fall away over the years as regulations, requirements on volunteers that are becoming more and more stretched in every direction. And I just wonder if we can provide structured support for delivering events. You know, this is the tick list you have to do. And the example that I would give, Councillor Jesperson mentioned applying for a road closure. You want to put on a village fete, you have to provide a terrorism plan. And apparently calling 999 isn't sufficient in your terrorism plan to get an events licence. Well, it's a village fete. You know, we need to get the balance of risk right here. So I think that's where we can also provide a really good business case in terms of economic multipliers as well to other parts of the council to get people on board. So, yeah, and also provide mental, physical well-being outcomes to our communities as well.
Okay. Did you want to answer any of those points? No? No, okay. Great. Next, Councillor Ryan Hope, a portfolio holder, would like to make some comments as well. Online, I believe.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'm happy not to make any comments. I think Paul was answered the question where my hand was raised to add some more detail, so I'm happy to give way at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Hope. Next on to Councillor Northam.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Northam, Upwell Broadway in Weymouth. A few points. Starting, I welcome the report. I think the difficulty with any of this is about funding, and a lot of our discussions have been about funding. I welcome the focus on partnership and collaboration, because I think the days of Dorset Council being a direct provider of such thing are gone, and we do better to work with voluntary organisations, etc., across the county. Last night I had a Weymouth Town Council Finance and Governance meeting. We have a grants panel. We looked at 15 proposals totaling £47,000. We can do this because we have a precept, and that was the last phase of this financial year. One of the things we struggle with is how do we measure the value that's provided by some of these grants that we do? And this isn't a financial return, this is social value. So one of my questions is, do we make any attempt to measure social value? I saw in the report that we talk about the number of people who are involved, but we don't actually attribute a social value. Be interested in that one. Moving on, second question is, do we actually have any DC assets which are, if you like, covered by this, directly by this strategy? I could imagine that we might have things like public monuments and public spaces, which could be included within here, but there's no mention of that specifically. Well, sorry, I haven't spotted any mention of that. Doesn't mean there isn't any. And lastly, on the policy, there's a section talking about our cultural assets. It mentions pubs, which I thoroughly approve. I was surprised that it didn't mention churches, church halls and schools as also being venues for cultural activities. I think they're quite significant. I'm not talking about religion or teaching, I'm talking about the other things that frequently take place in schools. So I wonder whether that might be included in that opening description of where culture takes place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Northam. Paul Rutter, Service Manager for Leisure, Arts and Cultural Services. In terms of social value, there are a number of ways that you can calculate social value, and a number of organisations do that. Certainly they do that in terms of their applications to national bodies, etc., where they're trying to make the case. So I'm sure I could share something with you on that one. In terms of DC assets, the most obvious assets that we have is museums. And whilst that doesn't sit within my service area, we obviously do provide grant funding to support museums. And again, it's around that providing a level of funding to try and provide some support, but the majority of which comes from the organisations themselves. I'm not sure about the monuments bit. I would certainly have to look that one up. I don't have any budget lines that are responsible for any such thing, so that may well sit within assets. And in terms of the church, halls and schools, are you referencing the main committee report where it's not mentioned, or are you referencing the strategy itself?
I was referencing the strategy document itself.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, we can certainly look at that. I think one of the key things, as I mentioned earlier, certainly church halls, community halls, and such like, we will often provide support grant funding to deliver projects in those places, as well as say, capital leverage, where might be things like supporting repairs to the roof and things like that, which are absolutely critical for them to be able to continue to operate. And, I have to say that, like yourself, we often receive a number of grant applications, and it's always quite heartwarming when you're actually able to provide some funds, because you recognise the value of the activities and what's happening in those places and how critical it is to their continuation. So it's certainly a key thing for us.
David Taylor next.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor David Taylor, Chelmsford St Mary. Your last point is quite an interesting one, because the fact that you were saying about the grant allocations from this fund going towards youth clubs and halls and stuff, that should be the parish council's job, I think, to be repairing that sort of stuff, not our money out of our charities and stuff. Anyway, that's just an observation on there. The thing is that I throughout this entire conversation with relevant councillors within the chamber today on all sizes, because gatekeeper seems to be coming through all the time, and this to me worries me, because the fact is I've seen this before, where the fact is that you control the funding, but it's not going into the communities, deep into the communities where it's effective, i.e. the north, which is a desert. It is the desert community and developments and stuff. So therefore, I would be interested to know that your prediction, your process, where are you going to, and what are you showing what you're happening with? Because we don't see that. All we see is the fact of lump funds. You also mentioned associations as in Arts Council. Arts councils are dying on their knees, to be quite honest. They are literally, I think their funding is like virtually zero to anybody at the minute, because they haven't got any money. And so I'd be very interested in that one there. Various areas I would pick up on, for example, like you're saying community involvement is in police force, fire stations, fire people, community action groups, this, that, that. I would think that would be more of an area to go down as well, to actually incorporate those societies, to give you actually a support of a stream to actually get to the communities that we are trying to tap into. And that's a very important one for me. Youth clubs, youth associations, you've mentioned various bodies on that one there, but I don't see it as a plan of work within this paper to actually get out there to make sure it actually fits into all of the communities that we've discussed with today. Schools, young premium schools, pre-meet centres, these sort of places are not touched. And I'll finally close on this. Was mentioned with Councillor Brenton here, the fact is that when we have planning applications going through, and this is not a political point, Chair, we've had various applications coming through where there are no village halls being built. There are no doctors' surgeries, there are no dentists, there are no this, no that, no the other, just houses. I would like to know from you, as this organisation here, within our council, how we are targeting to get into those communities, because those are the communities that are going to be dying on their knees within about 10, 15 years' time. So my question is, your process, good paper, I understand where you're going, we need to get yourself spread across, can be too thin, I understand that, but I know I'd like to know as a future to see where you're really going to. And as I said, the gatekeeper in this is you. Should it be them? That's my question overall. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paul Rutter, Service Manager for Leisure, Arts and Culture. I disagree that we're the gatekeeper. We are a stakeholder in this strategy. We do provide some grant funding that supports the sector. We support communities. But actually, if you look at organisations like Arts Reach, it's actually those organisations that are going out into the communities. In terms of the funding, we will only ever give 20% of funding towards these. You talk about the infrastructure and things like that. So there is an expectation that town and parish councils will also be putting money in to fund in their community. So it's not about Dorset Council doing that. In terms of the service that we provide at an officer level, we very much, we go out to the communities, we try and engage with all parts. You mentioned like schools. We have a music service at Dorset Council, so they will engage with the schools. So it is very much a collaborative approach. It's not a single organisation. It's not a single gatekeeper that is in control of all of this. We are working collaboratively and trying to support each other to get the best outcomes that we can. And we constantly So in terms of our funding, we'll have monitoring meetings where we'll be seeking feedback continuously on how we can improve the services that we're offering. And this strategy is very much around trying to support placemaking. You're right, it's very difficult with Dorset. It's such a large geographical area with so many small town and parish areas. So it's probably a lot harder than a BCP council that's got a very condensed location and offer. But I'd like to think that collectively the sector does a good job at trying to get out there and promote the cultural activities available to our communities.
Good. Thank you very much for all of that. Sorry? Go on then.
Thank you. Yeah, David Taylor again, Chancellor St Mary. You've emphasised the key wording in there, which should be kind of reworded, I think, within the document. We. You know, the thing is that we word, you know, we will give 20%, we will do this, we will do that. You know, that sort of language to me is kind of a barrier. So therefore, as an overall feeling towards the community, the County of Dorset, the people, to say there are ways and pathways that we could all get involved in to be a channel to make sure that we go through the arts, the culture and everything else. And it's easier to do. You know, some of these applications are incredibly difficult. I've seen lots of them. And also I've been involved in various Heritage Lottery Fund applications as well. So I know what these things do. So therefore, it's the we could be us. And I just think we need to be a little bit more softer on the approach towards communities as well. That's my question. Thank you.
Yes, very quick comment, if I could, just to elaborate on the point that Councillor Taylor made about Sherry Desmond, Hillforts and Upper Tarrants Wood, the remark that was made about the north of Dorset being a desert. Certainly we are a funding desert up in the north. We are very poorly funded compared with the rest of Dorset, but I can't let it pass the suggestion that we are a cultural desert. From Shaftesbury across to Sherborne, the whole of North Dorset is culturally very, very rich, and I think is performing well above its weight, delivering well above its weight in terms of culture in our villages and in our towns. So we are certainly, and thank you for reminding everybody that we are a funding desert, but culturally we are definitely not a desert in the north. It's a very, very rich cultural space, and it is an indication of how the fact that what Dorset Council needs to do is facilitate, not necessarily fund, because very little of what goes on in North Dorset is funded by Dorset Council. It's funded by communities. Thank you. I just wanted to make that point because I'd get into trouble if I didn't. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that largely covers all the matters everyone's spoken who wanted to. Again, the recommendation is on 2.1 of the report, and let's see all those in favour of it being forwarded on. And against? No? In which case, thank you very much for that. I'm going to propose, actually, that we have a 10-minute break, because I'm conscious of the timing. When we come back, I'm going to slightly rearrange things and go for housing first. It's now 48. If we start again exactly at midday, and I will start exactly at midday, not any later. Okay? Thank you. As I said just before the break, we're rearranging things slightly so we can get a decent amount of time available to look at the Housing Standards Report. So over to you, Councillor Taylor, portfolio holder.
Oops. Sorry, thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to really thank this committee for taking this item as an urgent item on the agenda today. I really do appreciate it. You may be aware, if I can just explain, you may be aware it went to People and Health Overview last week. They gave it a good airing, but the problem that we had there was that a number of the councillors had declarations of interest and therefore couldn't attend. And there were also a few who were absent anyway for personal reasons. So this is a very important piece of work that we've done and will make a lot of difference to an awful lot of our residents. And I would like, I'm really grateful for this committee looking at it, just to give it a bit more of an airing before it goes to Cabinet, because we have to get this one absolutely right. Just on that, I also couldn't attend last Monday because I am a private landlord, and I'd just like to make a declaration that I now have a dispensation so that I'm allowed to sit here today. Although I am a private landlord, I'm not a commercial landlord. My husband just happens to own a property for family reasons. There were recommendations made at People and Health Overview, which will also be taken forward as part of this paper, going forward to Cabinet. It needs to go on Cabinet fairly quickly because this legislation comes into force on the 1st of May. So we couldn't delay anymore. So to have it a better airing, I'm really grateful for you taking it today. It's an enforcement policy that we set up originally in about 2020, 2021, once when this authority was set up. We've added into it the Renters' Rights Act, which, as you'll be aware, is coming into force on the 1st of April. The Renters' Rights Act is probably the biggest change to private rented housing in a generation. This is huge, which is why I wanted it to have a really good airing. As always, we're still, just a point, we're still getting an awful lot of information in from central government. It's still trickling through. We've got the majority of the answers that we need, but I won't be at all surprised if we go online and find there's another raft of stuff just come in that we might have to tweak it. Hence, there's sort of tweaks within the paper that if we need to update it, it won't need to come back, hopefully. Just a few stats. We estimate there's something like 27,000 private rented properties within the Dorset Council area, and every single one of them are going to be affected by this piece. So if I can hand over, I don't quite know whether I want to go, no. Okay, if I can hand over to Steve Marsh, who has lived and breathed this for the last about 6 months. I'm sure it's written all over his Weetabix every morning. If I can hand over to Steve, that would be really good. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I've prepared a presentation for the committee. I think it might be helpful. Thank you for hearing this urgently, and I hope the presentation will give you some in-depth insight into the changes. So hopefully members will be aware that the Renters' Rights Act is coming into force 1st of May. There has been quite a bit of local and national publicity about this. And one thing just leading on from what Councillor Taylor said is that I just want to stress that the report covers the adoption of the strategy, while the report also focuses on the background as well. We need to focus on the actual enforcement policy itself. So just by way of background, the new Act received royal assent on the 27th of October, and this marked the sort of next step in the adoption of this legislation, which really started back in 2023 under the previous government's Renters Reform Bill. And the first stage, as I say, of the actual enactment process starts on the 1st of May with widespread tenancy reform. And just stressing again that this is a huge change, biggest change in a generation, as Councillor Taylor referred to, and also that it builds on existing powers that we already have. So this isn't just about the Renters' Rights Act, it's about existing powers in relation to housing safety, dealing with MEES, which stands for Minimum Energy Efficiency Standards, and HMOs, Houses in Multiple Occupation. And I think the way to think about it is that the new Act goes beyond our traditional enforcement powers of looking at property condition and extends our enforcement powers into dealing with tenants' rights. And that's something that we've not had powers to deal with in the past. So just looking at some of the changes, and each one of the changes comes with its own set of enforcement provisions. So members of the committee will probably have heard about the removal or abolition of Section 21, called no fault or no reason evictions. Landlords will still be able to gain possession of a property, but they will need to use new grounds, which are designed to be fair to both tenants and landlords, and they will need to give a reason for gaining possession. And just another key point is that landlords must inform tenants about their rights using prescribed forms. If tenants aren't told about their rights, and they don't know how to exercise them, so landlords will be instructed to give certain documentation to tenants, to ensure that they're aware of the rights available to them. There's new anti-discrimination provisions in relation to not discriminating against tenants with families or children, and not discriminating against tenants who are in receipt of benefit. And also changes to the way in which rent can be set and how it's advertised to prevent rental bidding, which can exclude people from the rental market. So these new changes basically create these new rules, which we need. There was a need to obtain compliance on that. We have new enforcement powers, and that is why we need this new policy. And as been mentioned, this is part of a phased implementation. So in phase 2, we're moving towards a national private sector landlord database, which is expected later this year, or I think perhaps later in 2027. And then in phase 3, the extension of the decent home standard to the private rented sector. So what's new in the policy? What's going to change? There is a duty on councils to enforce the landlord legislation. And by exercising that duty, we either need to issue a financial penalty or take a prosecution. So it does feel, as councils, that we're being sort of boxed into a corner as to what discretion we have as to how we deal with breaches. There are 13 new offences or breaches that need to be enforced to add to at least 8 or more existing criminal offences. There's a new system of civil penalty notices, which is one main vehicle of how offences will be and breaches will be enforced. So minor breaches are met with a fine of up to £7,000, and major criminal offences of a fine up to £40,000. And what the government have done for the first time is to prescribe a starting point for each offence. So no longer can you start at 0 and build up. You start at a prescribed starting point. So again, a little bit of discretion is removed. We do have discretion over whether we move up or down on that starting point based on mitigating and aggravating circumstances. And one of the recommendations, in the decision, is that authority is given to the portfolio holder and corporate director for housing to adopt a system for how we determine the final level of the fine. There is also a duty on us to report on our enforcement activity in the policy. So all councils have to report back to central government on activity. So I think we can expect to see more scrutiny on the level of activity in this area of work. So what's the impact? So, I mean, the desired impact is improved rights for tenants, and also I think we're going to witness the landlord sector being professionalised through various steps. There is an assumption in the policy that landlords are professionals, and we are assuming or expecting that they have a certain level of knowledge that they bring to ensure the safety of tenants and that their rights are protected. We think this will change demand for council services. We don't know about the increase, but there'll certainly be a change, and it remains to be seen the final impact that this has. But we expect to see there's new powers to enforce, which will lead to increased burdens, and there will probably be increased call on existing services like the need to inspect properties, and we also expect homelessness applications to be open for longer as a result. There is new burdens funding to assist with this transition, and we are looking to build resources to help us with that process, including additional posts. I think one of the biggest changes is a sort of shifting culture in relation to how we view compliance. There will be a need to ensure widespread compliance for these wide-ranging offences and breaches. And it'll be a bit like in relation to motoring offences. Everybody knows somebody that's had a speeding fine. There'll be a case of landlords knowing other landlords that have had fines, and that will then drive compliance as well. And especially as we move into later phase 2 processes, where we move into the landlord's database, where there's an expectation that we've already heard about 27,000 properties that would need to be registered. We believe that there may be, we don't know the exact figure, but there could be 10,000 landlords that would need to register. So ensuring that a good level of take-up into that database is going to need good awareness, but backed up by consequences and compliance. So the council response, just to finish off in relation to this, the enforcement policy is our foundation to this work. As I say, we have received new burdens funding, both into housing standards and housing options, to increase resources into this area, getting ready for the changes. We have got a communications plan. This isn't all about compliance and enforcement. So we've been raising awareness with landlords, and we had a successful landlords forum yesterday evening where over 100 landlords attended, and there was good, lively and constructive debate about achieving compliance. So we see that as a good step, a good positive step to working with landlords. But there always will be this cohort that we need to identify and ensure that they comply with the necessary provisions. And then finally, that there's ongoing system changes, staff training, to make sure that we're ready for the changes on the 1st of May. I'm happy to take comments and questions from the committee. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I moved and upset the microphones. Councillor Brent and Litchfield and Upton. As I was going to say, this is quite a subject quite close to my heart because I'm possibly the only person in this room who actually rents and doesn't own a property. Possibly with the exception of some of the younger officers who haven't quite jumped onto the ladder yet. And as a result, I know an awful lot of people who live in rented accommodation. And although this is a great advance, this, the Tenants' Rights Act, it is going to give us as a council considerable problems, probably for the first 6 months, then it might ease off. So my questions are we prepared for an onslaught of people who have been evicted? Because in my village of 100 houses, there are 10 houses where the tenants have been given eviction notices. They've got to be out by the 1st of May. Some of them have gotten a couple of extensions, but not many. And what is the responsibility of landlords to rehouse? It seems to be at the whim of landlords. That's just in my village. I also know of 4 in neighbouring villages who have been given notices to quit. So we're going to have a lot of people looking for help. And now the private rented sector has become more professional and they want guarantors and such like. The financial jump that you have to make, particularly as an older renter, you have to, you could be a renter of 70, 80. You have to find a guarantor, which tends to mean going and asking your children, who still have an income because they're working, if you're lucky, they will be your guarantors. It is getting very tricky. And there is a limit to other properties for them to go into. And I do wonder how many of those landlords will avoid this by evicting their tenants in the next month or two, and then putting that house to Airbnb or such like, and sort of sliding out of this sector. So are we prepared? What is our response? And how great a proportion of houses do you think will slide into Airbnbs and holiday homes and short-term rentals like that?
Thank you for that. I'm Ian Sim. I'm the Interim Corporate Director of Housing, so I'll try and answer that the best I can. I think there's no doubt that there will be a potential impact on the number of homeless households that are going to approach the council. Up until, and this is quite right, up until yesterday, we hadn't really begun to notice a significant difference, but as of yesterday, our figures have shown there has been quite a spike in the number of Section 21s that have come to our attention. And clearly we're working with landlords and with the tenants to try and prevent that homeless situation crystallising. But landlords still have a window of opportunity between now and I think it's the end of May to process and proceed with Section 21 evictions as they were known. In terms of our state of readiness, our homeless teams have been preparing for this as best they can. As you may know, we're very successful with homeless prevention measures, and in fact, we're one of the best performing authorities in the whole country. The new burdens funding, which the government have released, has allowed us to increase the staffing that we have. So there are 3 tenancy sustainment officers, and in Steve's team, we've got an additional 2.5 to 3 in there as well. Where the pressure point will probably rise is the availability of temporary accommodation, because we still do have high numbers of people in temporary accommodation. We are seeking to onboard, and there is a scheme at the moment where we're looking to onboard an additional 50 or 60 or even more TA units, but that will take time, and we've been looking at that for quite some time. Sadly, I think there might be an impact on B&B usage. I mean, clearly we don't want to use that. B&B is our last resort. But we're working hard to look at prevention. We're working hard actually to bring landlords with us in this, because actually it's not all about enforcement, because we work very closely with the private landlords in Dorset. And we have a number of schemes that we work with them in terms of incentives, and we can support them to continue being in the private rented sector. We simply can't, we don't know yet how many landlords are going to take the opportunity to sell up and move out of the sector. And I think that's something, well, it is something we really need to keep a very close eye on. And I think the first 6 months will be challenging, but I think as we start to implement the policies, then hopefully we can get on top of it. But the big thing, as Steve has alluded to, is that when the register comes into play later on this year or early next year, we simply do not know how many landlords we've got. We know we've got about 27,000 to 28,000 homes that are privately rented, but we don't know how many landlords we've got. And that's going to be really interesting in terms of how the new database is populated and how we have to respond to that, where there's been no action from landlords to actually get on that database, and that's where the enforcement policy as well will come into being. The enforcement policy gives us the opportunity, if you like, in terms of the stick, any breach within the Renters' Rights Act, in terms of information to tenants, in terms of discriminatory practices, in terms of bidding wars that can take place, we can take action, enforcement action, in respect of that. The thing about the eviction process, once Section 21 is finally abandoned and no longer legal, landlords must then prove their case before they can get an eviction order. So the evidential requirements are really quite significant. So there'll be a transitional period where landlords may wish to take advantage that they still have Section 21, but after that, hopefully the professionalism of the sector will start to develop, and there will be proper causation and evidential moves should a landlord wish to take the tenancy back. So you might then see a slowing down of that pressure that we've got in terms of homeless numbers. I'm hoping that's kind of answered the questions, but there's still a lot of this is unknown, and we can only prepare the best we can, Chair.
Okay, so Brendan.
Yeah. Can I come back on that? As another question, honestly, not just a rant. Councillor Brenton, Litchett and Upton. Bearing in mind, well, I suppose it's two questions, really. Bearing in mind that the landlords from now on, shall we say, not immediately, will be able to argue causation of why they need to get a tenant out, is one of those justifications the fact that the property is not up to modern standards and does not have insulation, is damp, needs considerable amount of money to bring it up to standard, because that is the justification at the moment for many of these evictions, is that it's going to cost us too much to get that house up to spec, so we can't let it. We will sell it because anybody can buy a wreck and live in it, but we can't re-let to a tenant. So would that be an acceptable justification, would be the first question, I suppose. And probably the second question is, where we're dealing with homeless people, or your homelessness prevention service, is there a slightly different tendency policy for, shall we say, the elderly renters? I am talking about people who've been in the same house renting for 45 years and are now being told they've got to go. And they don't have an income apart from pension, and the embarrassment of having to search around your younger relatives to find a guarantor is putting some of them off. We're talking about a bulk increase in trying to rent park homes and put a caravan in somebody's garden. That sort of issue is carrying on. So do we have any other ways of dealing with, shall we say, my elderly friends? Not me, thank God. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll probably answer a bit of this, but the more technical stuff I'll hand over to Stephen. No, in effect, the second part of the question is no, because a homeless household is a homeless household, and we have a duty towards homeless households. We can look at vulnerability and individual considerations, but at the end of the day, there's nothing specific which says that a more mature homeless household would get a higher priority than anyone else. So we have to treat everyone equally and within the eyes of the law. In respect of selling up, there is a provision within renters' rights whereby it is still a ground that you can evict your tenant if you are wishing to sell your property to a family member. But if you actually say you're going to evict somebody because of that, you're not then allowed to re-let that property for 12 months after that, because you will get tenants, and I suppose quite rightly, who have been maybe evicted, but who see that the 6 months later it wasn't actually getting sold in the first place and we're going to re-let it. That's illegal, and that's subject to a fine. I think that's a criminal prosecution in respect of that. After that 12 months, you can re-let it. So the reasoning why you can sell, and it's I suppose it would be Section 21, no fault with the tenant, condition is subject to other enforcement action, which Steve and his team can take. And I'll maybe hand over to Steve to talk about condition and dampness and mould and the usual kind of stuff that we get. So, Steve.
Yeah, Steve March, Housing Standards Service Manager. Just picking up on the first point initially about the grounds, then under the current system, if a tenant complains about the condition of their property and their property is in poor condition, then it's always been the ability of the landlord to serve Section 21 in those, not do the repairs and serve Section 21. There have been provisions around what's called the prevention of retaliatory eviction, but they weren't particularly successful and they were quite difficult to administer. So under the new system, there is no ground which says I can get out, I can evict my tenant because the property is in poor condition and I've got repairs to do. But as my colleagues referred to, there are grounds in relation to selling the property and allowing a family member to move in, and a no letting period of 12 months afterwards when they cannot re-let the property. Now the fine for that, for changing your mind in that 12-month period, it's a criminal offence, and the fine is up to £40,000 with a starting point of £25,000. So what the government are saying, they're saying, look, this cannot be Section 21 via the back door. That's what they're saying. And one of the big challenges of the legislation is how we're going to monitor that. How are we going to know about these cases? And for example, one way we're going to know about it is that we're going to get people presenting themselves to the homelessness team saying, I'm being evicted because my tenant wants to sell the property, or my landlord wants to sell the property, or my landlord wants to move in themselves. What we plan to do is that we will get notified, the enforcement team will get notified of that ground is being used. Then we can bring that case forward for a number of months' time and check. We can check to see if the property is being rented out again. And we're working on various other ways in which we can use intelligence to monitor that, because if that becomes Section 21 by the back door, it just undermines the whole process of what's trying to be achieved here. There are extensive enforcement powers in relation to dealing with disrepair in properties. improvement notices in relation to high risk issues that we encounter from a health perspective, highly focused on issues around exposure to excess cold, poor heating in property, poor thermal insulation, but also into other issues that you might not classically consider in relation to conditions around falls in the home. Falls contribute to a high level of NHS and hospital admissions, and there are legal provisions in relation to preventing that, especially where we get older tenants, I think have been referred to, and also young children in properties. So hopefully that provides some reassurance about the grounds that can be used, and that there isn't a ground in relation to needing to do repairs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that answer. That's very helpful, particularly the bit about being able to sell the property or let another member of the family move into the property. That's one I hadn't heard before. But can I ask, these are only for private rented, not for registered providers. So registered providers can still, when a tenancy comes to an end or somebody moves out, they can still sell, or they could sell to a relative. Does it cross work like that, or not really?
Can I just say, Chair, that the RSL sector is not part of this particular Renters' Rights Act.
Thank you. Councillor Gibson was next.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Councillor Simon Gibson from Verwood. Before I get on to talking about the specifics of our own enforcement policy, which is fundamentally what the agenda item is asking about, we could, of course, spend a tremendous amount of time debating the merits or dismerits of the Renters' Act that's passed through Parliament. I will not give my full views on that because that sits in another place, but I will say that I am incredibly concerned about the impact that these reforms will have on this council. I'm incredibly concerned that there are unintended consequences from legislation that, whilst I suppose well-meaning in the sense that it wants to drive up standards in the private rented sector and protect tenants, has a real and significant risk of undermining one of the most important parts of our housing stock, which is the private rented sector. There are many people, and I don't like to generalise by age, but lots of younger people who typically, for whatever reason, can't get a mortgage yet, of which the private rented sector is by far the most viable option for them to have their own home. And I am absolutely convinced that there comes a point, and this new legislation may well test that point, to which it becomes not viable or just simply not sensible for many well-intentioned small landlords to rent their properties out to people who will therefore miss out on the opportunity of a good home. Time will tell whether that's true, but we need to be ready for that. And I must admit, I'm a bit nervous at some of the comments so far from officers about what our best guess of what is coming down the line looks like. And I appreciate, in many ways, you can't know everything, but I do wonder how curious we have been and what preparation, therefore, we put into place for what might come down the line very soon. You know, I do note in the report, point 7, on the financial implications around the new burdens funding. It's for 2 years. You know, I wonder what the call might be in future budgets of this council to try and plug the gap. Are the local taxpayers ultimately going to have to fund the ideological decisions of Westminster when it comes to what private rented sector looks like? Because for me, most private and small landlords are good landlords, and actually I fear the burdens that are going to be put upon them are going to be significant. So I guess it's a question about have we done enough work to work out what's coming down the line? I'll ask that question, then I'll come back, Chairman.
Thank you, Chair. Really good question. In terms of the funding aspect, we have new burdens funding for 25-26. We're awaiting our allocation for 26-27. But you're right, that new burdens is 2 years. However, what the government have said is that the new database, landlords will have to pay a fee to go on the database, and that fee in some shape or form and define income, which is never a good thing, will come back to the local authority. We don't know the exact details of that, but there has to be some concern that, you know, will we get all the money or will we not, as the case may be? And that is a complete unknown. We believe that the new burdens funding so far has been sufficient, but we're awaiting next year's allocation, and that was supposed to be literally now as to what that was going to look like. So that's the concept. It's a self-funding concept. Watch this space, I would have to say. The second thing about how well prepared we are, I think, Chair, we're as prepared as we probably can be in respect of this. We have beefed up the, that's a technical term, we have beefed up the homeless prevention team, and we have beefed up Steve's team in terms of the enforcement. Steve is part of a national framework in respect to this, and there's a lot of national discussion going on about state of readiness and what do we need to do. And I think we're building on the best practice that we can nationally to implement that and to get that into place. I think it's at the People and Health Committee, so I'm still quite new, so I'm getting the names sorted out. There was a debate around, well, we are concerned about the funding, and there was an amendment or a suggestion, a recommendation that Cabinet consider that after 6 months, a scrutiny committee or an overview committee should look at, well, what has the 6 months said to us? What are the implications? Are there pressures that we're not able to deal with? And perhaps, Chair, that might be a really good way forward. So all I can do, Chair, at the moment is give the assurance that we're as prepared as we can be prepared with the knowledge that we have. But things are changing literally every day. We had a tenants forum meeting last night, and it was a really good turnout, really good debate. These are the good landlords that really want to get compliant, of course. But nonetheless, even as late as last Friday, we're updating the Landlords Forum on a new piece of information that's come out from government in terms of the kind of information we share with tenants and the like. So there's a constant drip feed of stuff coming out. All I can do is assure the committee that we're really keeping a very, very close eye on this and making sure we've got all the angles covered in terms of direct and indirect consequences.
Thank you for that, and so I should have welcomed you to your new role as well. I understand that, and I feel instinctively quite sorry in a way for the team with so many unknowns coming down. None of my criticism on this should ever be levied at anybody within this council. There is this spectre of the unknown looming over us. And I also don't want it to be mistaken for the fact that anyone who has concerns about the heavyweight nature of this legislation, I don't want it to be assumed that they think there should be a pass for all landlords to just simply do what they want. There needs to be legislation somewhere. It's just a case of, is it administered correctly and is the burden shared fairly? But what worries me is so the new burden funding, it's increased capacity for the conditions team, it's increased capacity for the housing options team, which is good. It'll help people if the demand surges. But the money doesn't build any new homes. It doesn't create much new space. And the figures there, from my time as a housing portfolio, I know won't buy us too many additional units of temporary accommodation or bed and breakfast. So my worry is whilst we staff it well, which I suppose maybe is all we can do, it doesn't actually do anything to solve the problem necessarily about what happens if people are evicted from their private tenancies. So maybe ultimately this is a question that we as a housing authority can't solve because we didn't set the legislation. But I would be interested to know, perhaps from the portfolio holder, did we do anything to raise concerns with the government while this was going through Parliament last year?
Thank you. I'm not aware whether we did or not, but this started its way through Parliament several years ago. So it's not only for this administration to have looked at it, it's also the previous administration. And I don't put blame on anybody there. The only thing I would like to add to this debate is that and this is no disrespect to any private landlords that are around, the majority are absolutely brilliant, but the private landlords' properties are the worst in this country. And this is something we've really got to address. There's been a lot of legislation gone through recently on properties that are owned by registered providers, and their properties are becoming a lot better now. They've got EPC ratings that they have to get up to. I think it's EPC-C by later on this year. We're a long, long way off that for private renters. And I think while this is going to be a very bumpy ride getting this in place, I think it's the right thing to do long term. The bottom line is renting house out as a landlord should be a professional job. We have got an awful lot of what I call, including myself, accidental landlords who just happen to come across a house through family reasons in this country. And we need to try and keep them on board as much as we can, but we can only do what we can do, because the bottom line is we need to have people in good quality, healthy homes. Health and homes are so closely linked together. We've got to get this right. And as I say, it's going to be a bumpy ride. And I don't think it matters which government was in. I think it's something that we need to pursue. Thank you.
Last one from me, Chairman. Thank you. You may have been expecting a more political question from me. That wasn't my intention, actually. It was, although to respond with a political point, therefore, it is clear that most parties accepted that there was a need for renter reform, myself very much included in that. The Renters Reform Act in its current term is very much a creation of the administration that entered Parliament in 2024, which was the same time that we had an administration change here. Would you confirm, not necessarily today, but would you come back to us afterwards and let us know whether we did do any lobbying? Because I don't want to be a council that whinges relentlessly about unintended consequences if we didn't participate when we had the chance to do so, because we do know there's problems coming down the line. So if you could write back to us, that would be great. The final point I wanted to make was, at various points of it, I think it was referenced during the officer's report, it was talking about, in essence, the stick that we can use for enforcement. And it was just, the other side of is the carrot, if you like. What are we doing to try and encourage, especially the accidental landlords, to do the right thing, especially around information and signposting, to make sure that they don't accidentally fall into becoming a bad landlord, which I'm sure was never their intention?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Steve March, Housing Standards Service Manager. As been mentioned, we've got a communications strategy for this. So over the last few months, we've been raising awareness with local landlords on the forthcoming changes. We've got a landlord forum. So we have a list of landlords that have signed up with us, and we're pushing out information to them on a regular basis every 4 to 6 weeks at the moment, with updates as to the provisions, and that will continue. This isn't a 1st of May, all done and dusted job. This is going to carry on. With there's a lot of questions last night about the database, and with that not coming in, I think, until later in 2027, we're going to see this communication strategy carry on into probably well into next year. Because I think as the provisions bite, then, okay, we've got the low-hanging fruit at the moment. We've got the landlords that want to communicate with us. More are going to come forward over time. There was a spike last night on people joining the forum. So people came to the forum, weren't members, so were signing up. They saw the benefits of membership. They realised that we are there to... It's a difficult message, isn't it? We're there to help. We're there to help the good landlords, but also there's the message that we've got to have a conversation about those that aren't going to comply. And I think it's a reassurance to landlords that are prepared to put the time and effort in to comply, to know that there is a consequence for those that are dragging the sector down. But back to your point, communication strategy with landlords will be ongoing. There's been a lot of attention in the sort of print media, websites in relation to raising awareness. Our comm strategy is going to change as we get into April, and we're going to focus a little bit more on tenants as well. Because let's face it, landlords should know this is coming. It's the duty on them to make themselves aware. Tenants, they're not professionals. You know, they need to know what their rights are. So as we move into April, we are going to ramp up tenants' awareness of this, so that they know what their rights are, who they can contact, and how they can gain access into the service if necessary. So the main approach, just to summarise, is via that ongoing communication strategy, and we've got input from our communications team to make sure that we're hitting the mark on that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Piers-Brown from the Cranbourne Chase Ward. You mentioned earlier that the Renters' Rights Act applies solely to the private rented sector, and I assume it is observation bias by the nature of our roles that we get contacted with grievances around the social rented sector. Without going into details, go through some of the memorable cases, you know, pest infestations, no hot water for 6 months, leaking roofs, mould, all that kind of stuff. How are we going to, and that's meant to be the state-supported sector, how are we going to communicate that to the wider public and tenants of the social sector to make sure that they aren't misunderstanding their rights, because they, by the sounds of it, haven't changed significantly? That's question number one. And question number two, I guess, is to highlight my concerns that, again, picking up on our conversation from earlier this morning, that fine income is going to be used to provide additional Dorset Council resources, and we live in an age of Dorset Council budgets being under ongoing increasing pressure. I am not suggesting that any officer would see that as an income stream, but by having it as one, we are creating an incentive within the system and process of the council that will reward that behaviour. I'm assuming it's prescribed in the legislation from the way that you phrased it, so there's not much we can do about that. But I guess I want to understand your attitude to leniency working with people that have missed out on delivering on behalf of their tenants. How are we going to work to bring them back in line with legislation before getting out without getting out the fine stick, particularly as I would imagine that, you know, as with all legislation, the big boys have teams of lawyers and people that are working on this stuff day in, day out, and then roll that out on across the nation. If you are a landlord of one property, you know, and it's a side income, you're working hard and whatever, living your life, you don't have that level of expertise at your disposal. So how do we support those landlords who could often be better and have a much better relationship, personal relationship with their tenants? They may own the property next door, for example, and we don't want to lose them from the private rented sector for all the reasons on demand that we've been speaking about. So sort of two questions there.
Chair, if I, excuse me, Ian Sim, Corporate Director of Housing. Again, it's going to be a double act for that one. Really good questions again. And I think that's the thing, when you've got a fine income stream, there is a perverted kind of motivation. The more fines I can do, the better, if you like. The legislation, though, is quite clear in terms of what the breaches are and what the criminal prosecutions are, and we've got to kind of implement that. But if there's a landlord that's struggling, then we have support in place that we can work with that landlord to get them compliant, because that's the key. You know, it is about sticking carrot to some extent, but the private rented sector, we depend on them a lot in terms of housing residents of Dorset, because we don't have the social stock and we don't have the stock available that makes that something we can't do. So Yes, we've got to work with landlords, we've got to get them compliant, but there is that at the end of the road, if that's just on deaf ears, Steve and his team, although he looks quite a nice guy, but Steve and his team will go out and enforce the policy. And I think, as Steve said in the presentation as well, the way the whole thing's framed, it's a bit like a speeding ticket. You know that if you break the law, you're going to get fined. But there is support in place that we can work with private landlords. If they come forward, we can get them compliant. So there is that already in place. I know Steve will want to add to that. In terms of the social housing sector, I mean, it's really disappointing that social landlords, they've a clear obligation to ensure their homes are in decent homes condition. The regulator for social housing is really clamping down now in terms of the consumer standards. And I just read a report literally yesterday. Yesterday was a busy day, but yesterday where the consumer standards now really starting to bite. Biggest issue, repairs and maintenance. Responding to AWAB's law in terms of dampness and mould. Now, we do meet with the associations every quarter, and we do talk at length about their performance. We talk about the complaints that we get, and we try and understand what the Ombudsman's saying as well in terms of any local RPs. So there's a framework and a structure there that we can, if you like, as Strategic Housing Authority, have those conversations. But there's also discussions that Steve and his team have in terms of individual complaints that tenants might go to Steve and say, damp and mould, my landlord's doing anything. And you do, and Steve does respond, his team does respond to that. So I'll probably stop there and let Steve take on the other part.
Thank you. Just to clarify about this income stream, I think what's really important is that the main income stream that's going to potentially sustain work into the future is a proportion of a fee from the database, not the fines. I've been quite clear, and just to provide you reassurance, that fines are pursued on the basis of justice, not for fee income. So this isn't about parking tickets being issued to get to targets, that sort of thing. Nothing like that at all. That cannot be tolerated, because that is not the way that we work. We'll get that would be a disaster if we end up even thinking about it in that way. But the database is that opportunity to know where landlords are. It will become a platform to get information to landlords, to professionalise them. There could be training modules associated with sign-ups. So you can see how that would all fit together. And because it's a legal duty to be signed up, then pursuing landlords to be on the register, it's within our interest to get all the landlords signed up. And it's a byproduct of that process that we will get a proportion of their annual sign-up fee. So this is an annual fee, so it's not a 5-yearly or this is a regular point that landlords will need to update. So having that annual income, the more landlords we get signed up, the more professional the sector becomes, the more income we receive, the more staff we can employ, the more policing we can do. The whole thing is a sort of cyclical cycle, and that's not even thinking about the fines. So I think we need to sort of put those distinguish between those two points. I think that's really important, and we will be under a duty to make sure that we get as many landlords signed up as possible. Because there's no point having a database where 60% of landlords are signed up. There's no point. There's no point at all. We think that about 50% of landlords use a letting agent and they'll sign up quickly. We think that another 20-30% will be dragged through and eventually sign up. And we think we'll be left chasing the remaining 20% approximately. You know, that is where the regulatory work is going to come in. And just in relation to supporting landlords, I impressed on it last night about this speeding ticket sort of analogy, which I think is the right place to start the conversation. everybody knows somebody that's had a speeding ticket, and that's why there's high compliance with speeding in restricted areas. And the same needs to apply to landlords. I think when we've looked at compliance, we've kind of focused down on individuals, and we need to get this individual compliant. But actually, we need to see non-compliance and consequences a way of actually bringing the whole sector up to standard, so that landlords know of other landlords that were fined, so that then that drives up an idea that there are consequences to non-compliance. But just to reassure that the balance, the check and balance to this is around public interest. There's still got to be a public interest in issuing that fine. So there's got to be, there's two tests that we have to satisfy, which is getting down into the sort of legal aspect of it. One is the evidential test. So we've got to prove the case to the criminal standard beyond all reasonable doubt. In most of the cases, not all of them. Some of them are sort of civil burden of proof on the balance of probabilities. Don't ask me why there's a difference for different breaches, but there are. And that makes our job sometimes a little bit more difficult, sometimes a little bit easier, because obviously proving something on the balance of probability is easier than proving it beyond all reasonable doubt. But the second test is the public interest test. It's got to be in the public interest to issue that fine. And I see that as there isn't a public interest test when you come to speeding, but there will be a public interest test when it comes to issuing that fine to landlords. So, if a landlord has a reasonable excuse, if they've done everything they can to try and prevent that offence from occurring, if they've got 3 properties, the other 2 are up to standard, and this one slipped through, that's, that I can see that would be a reasonable defence. And it might not be in the public interest to fine them. So all these kind of reasonable judgments come into the process to ensure that what we're doing is sort of proportionate. I think that's the key word. It's proportionate to the issue that we're facing. Obviously, there will be significant offences where ignorance is no defence. But there are other issues where this public interest process will come into play.
Okay, I'm very conscious of the time. We are supposed to finish at 1 o'clock, but I don't think we're going to manage that. So could we have an extension for 15 minutes to carry on to 1:15? Deal with the remaining items? Yes? Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else wish to, any questions? Sorry, go on, Joel, and then...
Sorry, I just wanted to add on the last point that always remember that we have to put returns into central government. And what I want is that we end up about the middle of the pack. I don't want us to be an outlier. And it's basically guessing where the pack is going to be. So we need to be careful. We've got to do we always need to be a Goldilocks. Just enough, not too much, not too little. So that's where I'm coming from on this. Thank you.
So, yes, gosh, this has been a really interesting debate, hasn't it? I think we would all agree that the private rented sector needed wholesale review because it's clearly been failing for years and years if you compare us with Europe. So something needed to be done, and I think it's a pity that what the legislation that's been brought forward is so uncomfortable for a place such as Dorset, because I can see this working very well in some large cities. And I think, yet again, our legislators in London don't know a great deal about places like Dorset, so they didn't really know about the unintended consequences. And I think you're absolutely right that what we're going to have is a bumpy ride. I suppose what I hope is that the end result of this is that in a number of years' time, there will have been a shakeout of the private rented sector, And what I hope the outcome of all this is that it's very much more professionalised, because one of the things that makes me nervous, and always ever has, is all this constant reference to accidental landlords. I don't want an accidental dentist, you know. We have this notion in this country, because of our very skewed property prices, that buying a property and letting it out, it can be your pension, and any fool can do it. And that's what's put us in the place that we're in now with our private rented sector, is we thought that we made it an absolute free-for-all for anybody to just buy up a cottage and let it out as a separate, as a side hustle. And I don't actually think renting homes to people should be a side hustle. So what I hope is that at the end of all this process, the private rented sector is very much more professionalised. And if that means that we have a shakeout, and that some of the accidental landlords, as it were, either become more professional or sell their properties on to professional landlords, well, then we have to get through that period. A property that is sold from being let and it's still a property. I think my grave concern is with the accidental landlords turning their properties into Airbnb, and if there was anything we could do to make that harder, that's something I would look for legislation to do, because that's the real danger for us here in Dorset, is that these properties go out of the housing market altogether. I am very concerned about the funding of all of this. I mean, the new burdens funding, it's going to last for 2 years. I think we know the way these things pan out, don't we? That it's going to be another cost to Dorset Council when the new burdens funding runs out. We know that that's coming. And I don't believe that the fines will be much of an income, because there will be significant costs aligned to raising fines. It's not a parking fine. We're going to be having legal fees and appeals and so on. So I don't think we should be expecting that will contribute much. And of course, if, as I anticipate, there's a shakeout in the sector, I think the number of landlords over the coming years on our register might very well fall considerably, and we have fewer, better landlords, which would be a good outcome. But of course, that would be less money coming in from the landlords register to fund all of this. So I do think I did note what you said, that the People Overview Committee asked for a review of this in 6 months. I'm not sure 6 months is enough time. I think maybe 9 months would make more sense, frankly. But because we as a council are going to need to have a good understanding of what this is costing taxpayers, regardless of the fact that, notwithstanding the fact that we all think this has to be done, and by and large it's a good thing, it's still going to cost our taxpayers a goodly sum of money in due course. So I would like to reinforce the fact that we need to come back to this and have a really good understanding of where the costs are and what the costs are going to look like, especially when we know what other legislation is coming, because there's more coming, isn't there, in 6 months? You know, it's not a snapshot, this is a process, not a point. So perhaps in 9 or 12 months we could come back to either scrutiny or overview. But personally, I'd like it to be overview, and maybe a joint overview where we could have a really good look at how this has played out, what has happened in the private rented sector, you know, what the shakeout actually has looked like for us, and what the costs are going to look like going forward. So I'd like to make that recommendation.
Thank you. I think you're absolutely spot on. We need to keep a really close look at this. I mean, I'll be keeping really close to Steve through all this implementation and to Ian, but I think this needs to come back to committee. If you can leave that one with me on the timelines, because nothing may happen in May. We may be sitting here in June and with still nothing happening. So if you can leave that to me, and also to work with Andy and Louise and also the chairs of the Scrutiny Committee to decide the best place for it. But even if it goes to scrutiny, I'd very much welcome you coming in and taking part in the discussion, because this is where backbenchers really, really add value to what we do on the council. We don't do this in isolation, any of us. And I had an anecdotal one yesterday about what about landlords who just let a friend live in a house and that they just do it out of the goodness of their heart and they don't charge anything. They're still landlords, and these are the ones we're going to have a problem getting to, because they don't even regard themselves as being landlords. It is going to be really tough, this lot is. The big landlords are going to be fairly easy to get to. The ones who use letting agents are going to be easy to get to. But it's I've got a mate in a house that I own up the road. Oh, by the way, I own it. I don't bother charging him. That's going to be the problem ones. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we've had another really thorough debate on that. If it's very short, because we're very short for time.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor, Councillor St Mary. Just some observations and some fear points really to look into this, because things I've not heard about in the legislation, the fact is the interpreter languages on this, as in with the people living in the properties, whether or not they're being heard properly, and whether or not the landlords are being heard properly as well. So language, that's a big one, especially around here. There's a lot of that one there. The Data Protection Act, I hear you say about the fact that the landlords being feared into being exposed if they get fined and this, that, and the other. I get a little jumpy about that, because that's data protection, isn't it? And that makes me worry about the fact that there's a Freedom of Information Act and all that sort of stuff. So I'd be very, very perceptive about that one there. And also the fact of the quality of the lettings. You know, we know, for example, and you've raised it already, mould. A massive problem in this area, massive. And the thing is that there are landlords and housing associations which are not getting on top of it. So how are we going to check this? How are we going to check this to make sure the properties are suitable for rent or let or whatever? So therefore, there's another layer there which we've kind of left out a bit within all of this conversation today. But the 3 points is to make sure that we understand the landlords and the tenants, whether or not we've got the agreements are being in effect. Fear is another one. People won't speak. If they're being told by the landlords to shut up, they will. So therefore, and I've got 2 cases in Dorchester where it's going on at the moment. So therefore, it's fear is a big factor. So we need to be really, really in there somehow. That's it, really. Thank you.
So yes, the recommendations are under 2.1, yes, so we'd like to see all those in favour of that, to the Cabinet, and to come back in 9 to 12 months for a report back. Okay, see all those in favour? Anyone against? Thank you very much. We have one very short item left to do, which is the draft working place programme. And Anthony, do you want to lead us into this?
So we had the key lines formation around some of the communities work that we're looking to do. We're going to hopefully be integrated into the communities work that's happening. So that should all join together quite nicely. And if there's any other comments on other items on the floor plan, please make them.
Sorry, very briefly, Mr. Chairman, I'm aware of the time. Yes, thank you very much for that, Anthony. That I think it just, now we've started talking about Dorset Council getting out of the way. It comes up at every meeting, doesn't it? So it's clearly a timely conversation. On our forward plan, what I don't see is the e-scooter rental trial. This is going straight to Cabinet without coming here. It's an introduction of a new service. So it seems to me that ought to be coming to overview before it goes to cabinet. That would be, why isn't it coming here, would be my question. I think it should be. Especially since it's not actually straightforward, e-scooters, is it? So it does merit a little bit of a knockabout.
I'm happy to second that.
Yes. Sorry.
Sorry. It was on our forward plan for March, and I believe the belief was that the legislative powers hadn't been granted in time, so it was going to be post-summer, so it was removed from our work programme to come back. But I'm assuming there's obviously been an expedition of those powers, and they've been granted in advance of the summer, so they're trying to get it in quickly so we can apply it. I'm assuming that would be why, but I'm happy to take that away and come back to you.
So, well, that's as may be, but we have no meeting scheduled for April. We're perfectly capable of meeting in April if that's. It's not the schedule doesn't drive the agendas of this committee. This committee drives the schedule, and if we think that we need to talk about the e-scooters service, then we must be allowed to do so, and we can't be told that something else has intervened and it's rushing forward to cabinet, because that's not how it's meant to work. So if, I'm sure we could, we don't have a meeting scheduled for next month. We can have one. We can meet monthly if that's what it takes. I'm not volunteering, but yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that to them and suggest that we see it before cabinet.
Yes, so Anthony, if you email people with once you've had a chance to speak to your colleagues about that. Councillor Brown? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I imagine the answer is it's probably scrutiny, but as with the portfolio holder here, one of the things I would like us to look at is effectively private management companies becoming almost the default for new large build estates, and they are effectively delivering the same services that town or parish councils would deliver or other public authorities, but they are billing people again. Some places people are paying 50% of what they pay in their annual council tax, again. I think it's a bit of a national scandal. There's a big campaign around sort of fleasehold and things like that. And the Leasehold Reform Act only applies to leasehold properties. It doesn't apply to freehold properties. But it is a byproduct of, my areas of expertise aren't great here. Is that a byproduct of our planning policy that we have here? And that obviously is that the local plan's being reviewed. Can we dovetail into that? Because I would really like to, at some point, scrutinise how they have come about, why we consider them acceptable, and if there is an appetite from Dorset Council to challenge that status quo and for a lead nationally.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. I couldn't agree more. What I would suggest is that because overview is setting policy, and obviously we're going to get into the realms of the legalities around it, and the government at the moment are doing a consultation exercise around this very thing. Government have recognised that it's not working, basically, and I agree with everything you've said. And I think possibly that if overview was to ask scrutiny to do a piece on this, with the view that depending on what the legalities around it are, as to whether there is the option then for the overview committee to start developing some policies around it, which may inform planning in the future, but it's early days yet. And as I say, the legalities around it, we will be obviously hamstrung to a certain extent as to what we can do, but let's have a look at it. Yeah, thank you.
Just to add my name to this is something very close to my heart, and it's something I regularly bring up at planning committee. It is, especially on affordable homes, and perhaps youngsters moving into a place, they've done all their sums and then they get hit with management fees, which I think are, well, we won't go there. Thank you.